Hello and welcome to Scottish Football Daily. Today we have got the first episode for the 26-27 season of our weekly podcast where we'll be looking at all the teams, all the runners and riders, the results, doing previews, breakdowns, analysis and all that other good stuff as we get through all the matches. I am Quinny and I'm joined by a very special guest, which I'm delighted to welcome to the channel for the podcast. An old football friend of mine, back on the screen with me, is Hendo. Ross, good to see you. Thanks for joining me.
Good to see. It's been a very long, really glad to be here for season preview and with weekly segment forward. Really look forward to it some football.
Yeah, long overdue, and I'm very much looking forward to it. And Ross, me known each other now for, I don't know, about 7 years probably, give or take. And you're somebody I always just had great when it comes to football. We've got live on just where football teams, players, and all that kind of stuff. But for you yourself, over the couple of years you've went into it, as it were, you've been doing lots of scouting and coaching. Just everyone, just a little bit about you, just so we know a wee bit about it before we get into it all.
Yes, absolutely. So at the moment I live in Perth, Australia, but my roots are very much from Scotland. I moved over here about 2 years ago, but as every Scottish football fan does, you keep tabs on the league. So really excited to be getting back into that. And as you said, I have been involved in the game a lot more in the last couple of years, doing some coaching, some managing. I've been scouting for DC United in the MLS, and last season I was with Cambridge United of League Two, who were then promoted to League One. Now, of course, the translation of that across to Scottish football is it's certainly a market that Scottish teams and even the National League and further down have certainly got their eyes on, being that kind of domestic link. So hopefully I can bring some value to maybe some of the players that have crossed the border. And with being in Australia, I've managed to get my eyes on quite a few players who've made the move over to Scotland. So I'm sure we'll be breaking down some of that later on in the podcast.
Yeah, look forward to all of that. And Ross's details, you'll be able to find him on social media. It'll all be linked in the description down below. And I know we've both enjoyed watching the comings and goings of all the Scottish teams so far this summer. Like you said, it's been a very active transfer window for basically everyone except for Celtic, but they're now kind of catching up with everyone, it feels like. And I think the team I had the most interest and most intrigue about coming into this summer window and into the 26-27 season was the people's hero from last year, which was Motherwell. Jens Bertolascu really was like a house on fire last year. Everything he touched seemed to turn into winning football. And with his departure, Elijah Justice left the building, Elliot Watts left the building. They're in European football now. I think Motherwell was one of the ones I was most interested in seeing how they would develop and how they would replace these guys and move in forward to next season. Motherwell themselves, Hendo, how do you view them coming out of last season into this one? Do they have maybe the biggest job of anyone else in the league in terms of the rebuild or the kick on from last season into this one, do you think?
I think they do. I've actually jotted it in the notes as squad surgery, and not just because of the players who were on the pitch last season. So obviously it's easy to point to Just, Watt, Callum Ward, and the like who have moved on, but also worth noting players like Andy Halliday, Aston Oxborough, Callum Slattery, Liam Gordon, and Kofi Balmer. These were all people who I would say were part of the core group of Motherwell, so that kind of leadership element. So when you're trying to replace two cores, essentially, the one that was really performing on the pitch and the one off the pitch, as well as the enviable task of replacing Jens Bertolaska after such an unbelievable season, it is certainly one that I'm sure Alfred Johansson, he will think that he can do just as good a job. But speaking to even one of my friends here who is a Motherwell fan, I think the expectations are slightly lower than what they were last season. Last season was very much having their cake and eating it with some cherry on the top. It was as good as it gets for Motherwell, finishing extremely high up the league with an extremely attractive brand of football to go with it. And I think with Motherwell, the best thing they done last season was creating value. So again, these players who came in, Jost is a great example. Elliot Watt flagged up really nicely when he had that loan spell at St Johnstone. And he really did shine through in a team who I think they struggled for identity, St Johnstone, as they went down. But in January, they've obviously tried to plan for the future. And part of that was bringing in people who could actually play with the ball. Elliot Watt very much fit that mould. And I don't think Motherwell had a lot of people to beat to his signature. And fast forward a year, 2 million for him, 6 million-ish for Elijah Just, a club record, even beating Lennon Miller from the year previous. Like I said, squad surgery. And I think, as we just spoke about there, Slattery, another big one. And having a look at some of their play from last season, it didn't occur to me just how much Slattery pulled out into the wide areas to start these plays from deep. Motherwell were really good at getting the ball back to the goalkeeper and restarting their phases of play from there. Callum Ward, excellent with the ball. And what actually happened a lot of the time, they would drift into this right channel with Slattery, combinations through to find Elijah just in the pocket, and then managing to get the ball forward nice and quickly. So to go and replace all these people in one window is going to be very difficult.
Agreed. I think Slattery is the one that really does go under the radar because he left on a free transfer and he's not like that kind of star name from last year, like the Elijah Just of this world, maybe even a McInnes or so. But yeah, all the same, very hard to replace. And I think Motherwell fans were all quite of that mind when they seen he was leaving for free. So an absolute big one for sure. Motherwell, when they hired Alfred Johansson, the manager, I thought they did a really good job of. I've said that a few times on here and on Twitter and whatnot, but Motherwell feels like quite an easy team to support at the moment. If you're a Motherwell fan, like things are on the up and up. They're very supporter focused, and they really know the assets that they've got at their disposal in terms of players as well as transfer fees they're able to pay and bring in. And Motherwell, it was really pleasing to see how they went last year because you did feel that they'd been doing some good work under the surface for a few years recruitment wise, and it maybe hadn't all quite came together in one particular season. There was little flashes of it here and there, but it felt like it was. So I think there's a lot of, again, I can't speak for Motherwell fans, but I think you're probably right that they probably don't overly expect to be pushing the top of the table as much as they did last year, but they definitely want to see continuity on style or continuity on project. And I think it's very encouraging what we've seen from them so far. This, to the best of my ability, is how the squad looked coming into the window. And this is how we find the squad today. So a lot of key absences, like you said there, even the guys like Halliday and Liam Gordon and such that have left the squad. And they've recruited like really well. I think the first guy that they signed that really caught my eyes was this guy, Mark Mirren. Now, he's now hit a mad worldie in the Conference League qualifiers from centre-back, which is definitely going to sell some shirts in Motherwell, no doubt about it. But although the recruitment hasn't been huge, I think it's been really clever so far. This Mirren looks like a really good player. And I also think the left-back, Dylan Williams, I think is his first name, Williams here on screen, is really high-caliber players that they're bringing in to this project. Normally we see SPFL teams maybe falter or stutter at this point and maybe just go to, we'll buy these guys that know the league and can steady the ship a little bit, but they're staying true to the plan. In terms of the incomings, I say Mirren and Williams, I think look really good. Everyone's excited about Voigt because he's half Brazilian. How do you think the business has been for them so far?
I think it's good. Also, not in CDM on your graphic there, but Girdwood Reich, again, speaking to one of my friends who is a Motherwell fan, he's coming in with quite a big reputation. Now, Transfermarkt would say free transfer, but he believes it's somewhere in the region of 600k, which, again, is a sum of money that you don't really see Motherwell thrown around. If it's to be believed, Willie Vogt would have been about 300k. And they brought in someone in Alex Paulson, who, he was a 7-figure goalkeeper only of a couple of years ago, and Bournemouth are still holding out hope that he will be something, if not maybe just someone to make a little bit of money back. But these are signings that, like you say, they fit a certain vision. One that I really like as well, Alex Lowry on loan from Wickham. It's almost like it's a very low-risk transfer. So they've obviously taken Elijah just from nowhere, a small diminutive number 10, if you want to call him that. They've made him into a certain player because they have a style that gets that number 10 on the ball. And I think if you've seen Alex Lowry come through in Scottish football, one of the things that was evident straight away was his ball carrying ability. So his ability to take the ball on the half turn and get the ball forward. He just never had a chance in that Rangers team. And I think since then he's been searching for someone to really just take a risk, have a go, show a bit of faith in him as a footballer. And I really hope he can get his career on the right trajectory at Motherwell. He's only 23. And I would imagine if his loan spell is successful, there'll certainly be either Motherwell or other teams within Scottish football in those upper echelons who'd be willing to give him that next step in his career.
Yeah, I'm just back from a couple of days break, so I've not had a chance to update all the boards. So good catch on the Lowry one, because that one did come in with a lot of fanfare, a player that definitely had a strong reputation around Scottish football when he was coming through, like you mentioned there. And a name I'd long forgot, to be honest with you, but definitely one that Motherwell fans have got optimism around. And I think Rangers fans who still support the guy or still want to see him do well believe that this could be a really good fit in terms of play style and how we could lock in, because you mentioned there about pockets and whatnot he's drifting into. I remember from watching Motherwell last year, between Ibrahim Said, Masmanise, Elijah Just, the rotations between all of them were off the charts. They could be in any sort of different number of combinations. Elijah Just could look like the centre forward. McInnes could have looked like a winger, and vice versa. They all rotated well. And before that, Lowry comes into the mixture. Yeah, they've still got Said, who I think is very underrated, and Voigt, who looks to be like maybe a bit of a Just kind of style, same sort of guy and pitch presence. But Lowry's maybe that one that's a bit closer to Elliot Watt, 'cause I think although Elliot Watt was off the charts for defensive actions, interceptions, and dual success, like you mentioned, well underrated in attack, was very much a front presser, very much, wasn't a highly prolific guy or anything, but definitely had that forward kind of contribution as well into the mix. And Girdwood Reich, some of the Motherwell fans in my chat have been saying he's going to be playing CDM. I see he's a centre back from when he was at Australia. He's played centre back already because I think McGinn and whatnot have been injured. So it'll be interesting to see how that goes. But without Lowry, I know Fadinger's quite box to box. There is a bit of a missing of that guy that takes the ball through the middle of the pitch and travels with it. So he could be on for a lot of minutes this year.
I think so. One other thing, obviously, we speak about all the recruitment. Motherwell they've done something completely different in terms of management recruitment over the last 3. So obviously Michael Wimmer came in. He certainly changed the style of football. And again, he was the one that signed Lucas Fadinger, which is quite funny because he was away within a couple of weeks within signing him. And then they've not decided to go into that Scottish market or appointing someone from down south. They've decided to go outside the box with someone who has really high level coaching experience. And I think you could see they were one of the best coached teams in the league last season. Jens Bertlascu was able to get his point across extremely well to those players. You've heard many interviews from people like Andy Halliday saying about how inspirational or how much of an impact he had on that team. And I think this is another really good appointment, just based on pedigree alone. A man who is 83 games managed for Rosenborg, again, one of the biggest teams domestically in their country. For one, Motherwell to be able to attract someone like that is excellent. It's great for the Scottish game, but 2, it shows that recruitment process is something they take very seriously. And if they continue to sign players that fit a mould, because he's going to play a similar style, probably not the same field tilting to the right, for example. He's not necessarily going to play the exact same style. It's a similar shape, which means you can use similar personnel within there, making less changes like maybe some other teams who have to completely overhaul when they chop and change from manager to manager. I think one other point I wanted to make, just separate from that, as much as I think Motherwell will do this season, they may get off to a little bit of a slow start. And they did last season as well. I think they had 1 win in their first 9, I believe. I don't know if that was all domestic or if that was in the league, with a lot of draws against some of the bigger teams. But it's their injury problems that they've got just now. A long list of injury problems. Leadership we just spoke about in terms of the group. Paul McGinn, Stephen O'Donnell, both injured, will miss the start of the season. But one little shining light after watching or after seeing what happened in Europe is Mikey Booth, who I don't think was on your depth chart, but a player who I understand was someone that Michael Wimmer actually identified as someone who'd like to play it around about 7. He was playing up front as a false 9 in Europe, but I believe he's more of a number 10. 19 years old, making his professional debut against Tórshavn, and he came up with an assist for the second goal, which was really impressive. He played the full 90, and as I said, he was identified at 17 to play a big part. He had an ACL injury, which left him out of the team, and as I said, he's just made his debut, in his professional debut, not just his debut for Motherwell, but his professional debut, an assist in European qualifying. Not a bad way to start off.
No, definitely not, and great shout on that one. I think, it's funny for Motherwell, because anything other than top 6 I don't think is acceptable for them this year, but like you say, it's not out the realms of possibility that they maybe don't have the best start to the season just because of European hangovers. We've seen it happen 1,000 times with teams that get the qualifiers early. And although Just is left and Watt is left, there's still that in Ward, as you keep rightly bringing up, there is still that expectation that McInnes is probably going to leave. And then I don't know if there's anyone really else on screen that's likely to go that'd be that crucial. Maybe Longello got some praise and plaudits last year, but you do feel that the squad still needs another incoming player or two, maybe in that front line, just to kind of reinforce or try and make sure the goals still come and whatnot. But I was chatting about it right before I went on break there, and we were chatting about the sack race. That's something we can maybe chat about maybe later on or on another one. But if Motherwell did have a bad start, I know the European results kind of change things now, right? But I was thinking like that could be one that might be surprising, because there's a big shoes to fill with Jens Bertlascu, and being as brave and forthright as Motherwell are to keep down that path is commendable. But so many teams then just pee the bed later on after a few bad results and throw the baby out with the bathwater and whatever. But all looks good from the European result, and it feels like the club are all pushing in the one direction. So I guess it's going to be a big year for Motherwell. I think top six is firmly like in their reckoning again. And let's see if they make it to a group stage in the Conference League. That would be fantastic as well. But failing that, I think they'll have the appetite to go far in a cup. Was it the semi-finals they made it to last year in one of the tournaments? I forget right now. But for this little generation of success that they're having going here, obviously they're very unlikely to win a league. So the cup is the thing that maybe delivers some proof of concept that they've achieved and they've developed on and whatnot. So yeah, that's kind of everything I've got. I think they'll have a good season and they'll firmly be a top six side, I think.
I agree. I think top six for me, I think as long as Alfred Johansson carries on a similar style, I think Motherwell fans will probably accept them, especially if they don't make any marquee signings, if they are planning for a longer term future with this manager. I think they would accept falling outside the top six, but I think they'll have enough quality, especially if they keep McInnes, to be able to finish in those top six positions.
Yeah. And what do you think the odds of keeping McInnes at this point? Do you think that's likely?
I think as the closer it gets, obviously there's going to be more people who are going to panic and need a striker. In terms of the teams who were looking at him in a planned sense, I think Anderlecht maybe ended up passing on him. Celtic had a look quite a few times last season and seem to have now absolutely sorted that striker area. So there's the two really ironclad rumours around McInnes. Having come from an English academy, would it surprise you if an English Championship team was sniffing around and would quite happily pay the 3.5 million that Motherwell were apparently quoting? I don't think that would be out the realms of possibility. So, but if he does, I think it would be closer towards the end of the window. And at that point, with Motherwell already having 10 plus million in the bank from transfer sales, there'll be no pressure to sell.
Yeah, that's a good point. I forgot about the whole Anderlecht domino effect because Oliver Antman has just signed for them from Rangers, obviously quite similar position, very different styles, but very similar position, you would say. Right behind Motherwell for me last year in terms of teams that I really thought, wow, they are a team that's capturing imagination, trying to get as much out of what they've got at their disposal and really making lemonade out of lemons, pardon the expression. It was Falkirk. This is how Falkirk looked. Calvin Miller isn't here on screen, but we can all imagine he's there coming into the transfer window. And this is how they look now. John McGlynn also kind of in and out, linked to the Scotland job. Very good reputation around Scotland as being like a good coach, a good developer of players, and a guy that's not really known for defensive football either, quite the opposite. The good thing about watching Falkirk last year is you really did feel, you mentioned Motherwell, how well coached they looked, but Falkirk really brought a good bit of that to the party last year. And if you look at the incomings they've brought in, Strain and Tanser and Sibbald, for example, some really good SPFL know-how, nous, experience and quality, for lack of a better expression, solid players in the division. And there's some other bits and bobs we can talk about here, but Falkirk, I think, is quietly in the mix to probably outdo themselves from last year. Again, they got to a semi-final, not quite a final, and were very strong top six contenders. So I think Falkirk are also one of these teams like Motherwell that just Scottish football fans in general will be watching with intrigue to see, can they move their project on in this season? Can they kick on despite losing some key players? Barney Stewart obviously leaving for West Brom also. But yeah, Falkirk, Hendo, how are you feeling about them?
As you said, really well coached. So John McGlynn, I think, universally known, one of the better coaches in the country. Someone who I believe has cited a lot of his best work because of his time with Brendan Rodgers. So I've known John McGlynn's work for a long time. I used to think he was very one-dimensional at Wraith Rovers, but he was always good at building squads, which meant they were constantly punching above their weight. He went away and built himself back up, changed his style of play, and he's absolutely reaped the benefits. 3 back-to-back promotions and a top 6 finish with Falkirk is absolutely fantastic. You mentioned there, obviously, they're definitely stockpiling in that wide full-back area. And straight away, as soon as I seen McMillan, Strain, Tanser, I was thinking crosses. Now, whether that plays into their strengths or not, I'm not 100% sure. I look across that front line, I think Parkinson obviously had a good start. Ross McKeever was largely unused, Laidlaw's largely untested, and I think that Barney Stewart-sized hole still exists in that team. So if I were them, I'd still be looking for that signing in that front line. Craig Sibbald come in, obviously one, a fan's favourite, 2, only 31 years of age, so still got plenty of years left in terms of his career. I'm not going to say he's at his peak, but certainly a player that can do it at Premiership level. And obviously having Brad Spencer in there, someone who was good enough that was flagged up by Jamestown Analytics as someone who could make the step up domestically. I believe I'm not sure he said no, but I'm pretty sure he signed a new deal to stay with Falkirk and essentially committing his future to Falkirk is a big coup for the club, but two, if you watch him play, he's very much metronomic and he's key to holding that team together. So having that strong base in midfield is definitely going to see them well. Now, one thing I will say, I had a look at some of their games in the League Cup. Group stages, they really looked poor against Ayr United. And this is an Ayr United team who have signed a lot of players from League One. So the league that Gary Naismith's obviously came to, he's now at Ayr. He's brought a lot of the best of League One with him. And now that is a good tactic domestically, especially at league level. But when you're stepping up that league, playing a top six team, I would have expected a lot more from Falkirk. John McGlynn's extremely good at building in patterns of play to his attacking. And to be honest, from what I've seen, there was not a lot of that going on. So it might just be a case of early season, the team struggling to gel with new players, especially with new players in the fullback and the wing area. But I think they're just lacking that little bit of quality in the top end, a la Calvin Miller, who they've obviously had to watch move on. The one other sort of thing to note, a few of the fans were a bit miffed about Lewis Nielsen coming back. I personally think he's quite a decent profile for someone who can play on that wide defence, but John McGlynn tends to play with a 4-2-3-1 type of shape. So as that right centre half, I'm not sure they've quite got the depth there either. Liam Henderson obviously usually playing on the left-hand side, I believe. Cole Donaldson perpetually injured, and Connor Allen, for whatever reason, seems to have fallen out of favour after a pretty good season. So there has been some good talk about Dennis Melniks, who's come in from Latvia, I believe. So we'll be waiting to see how he does. And I think once he gets Scott Bain back as well, as good a game as Hogarth had in the Cup, by the way, Scott Bain's a very reliable keeper at Premiership level. So it'll be interesting to see how Falkirk develop based on such an overperformance last season.
Yeah. I never caught that whole Jamestown bit on Brad Spencer before, but people that have followed my content prior to this channel will know that Brad Spencer became a bit of a, I don't want to say an in-joke or anything like that, right? But we were looking at the statistics of all the midfielders in Scotland last year, all the big ones, mainly like the defensive areas, Cammy Devlin, Nico Raskin, Engels, and somebody else. No, it wasn't even Engels. Can't remember. But anyway, when we were looking at all this, Elliot Watt, Devlin, and Raskin. And when you look at the stats that made all them stand out last year, and you compare them to other midfielders in the league, Brad Spencer is wildly under the radar. To hear where you heard that Jamestown piece, but offensive duels won in the league last season. Brad Spencer is number one. Long passes completed third, but all this other stuff like interceptions third. He's only behind Devlin and Raskin or Devlin and Watt. Duels the same. He's only behind these other two guys, maybe three for these other ones. Possession one, he's fourth. Defensive duels one, he's fourth in the division in total. Interceptions with possession adjusted, he's fourth. Forward passing, all cool as well. Progressive passing. Defensive duels sixth, as you see here. He features very prominently in all those metrics you want your main man midfielder in there that's going to break up play and move the ball forward. He's 30 years of age right now. And yeah, very much a unsung hero of this Falkirk situation. The last thing I'll say before you can tell me about that wee piece, right? Sibbald and McMillan, when I was reading the reports for these guys being signed, the big thing McGlynn said was they're Bairns, they're Falkirk boys, they're either from the town or their family or fans and that kind of thing. And I always like hearing clubs add a bit of that kind of connection to the community, the fan base, fabric, against the squad. Just wanted to throw that in around them. But Brad Spencer, where did you pick that up from? Do you remember?
I was actually just looking at it there. So it says in the Falkirk Herald, but it was reported by the Daily Record. It was when McInnes moved to Hearts, and obviously one of the things that he'd identified when he went to Hearts was there was this lack of kind of Scottish core. So alongside Jamestown, he was wanting to basically take the best of Scotland that he could get his hands on, and these players from further afield. So of course, Hearts done that fairly successfully from bringing quite a lot of people in from all different backgrounds. But one of the ones identified was Brad Spencer, who he would have been 29 at the time, and it was reported in the piece that they put out, it would have taken a significant fee to take him away from Falkirk. Obviously, he'll owe a lot to John McGlynn, who I believe he was with at Wraith, and his career was somewhat faltering until McGlynn took another chance on him, and he's become an absolute stalwart. And I'm glad that you brought those stats up there, because it is worth noting, without him, they are a much, much weaker team. He's basically the nucleus that holds that team together, and adding someone like Sibbald next to him, who is obviously a seasoned campaigner, I think is a good base to go off. However, that is at the trade-off of losing Dylan Tate, another McGlynn disciple who has followed him around the clubs. I think from a Dylan Tate point of view, he has to try and take the chance again. Obviously, it didn't work out at Hibs. He found himself floating around a couple of loan deals. And again, McGlynn came back, gave him a chance, built him back up to the point where now he looks like a much more accomplished player than previously when he was essentially just a prospect that Hibs were taking a punt on. So he's certainly more complete than what he was last time. And I think at 24, it's the right move for him to move, albeit it's at the expense of Falkirk's midfield duo in there. So it'll be interesting to see how they two get on as a pairing.
Yeah. I'd like to think that Falkirk can kick on this year. I know you're saying Laidlaw is a bit untested. I would agree with that. I don't know if he comes from a worse starting position maybe than what Barney Stewart when he's brought him in up through the ranks, as it were. But yeah, him and Calvin Miller, it's like a big ask, isn't it? Falkirk to replace those goals. The boy Krause or Crowhouse, I'm struggling with what one to stick with. It looks to be a wee bit of in terms of profile, the Miller replacement in the waiting. So can he and Laidlaw, can they fill the boots? Can they make the step up? I think that's probably what hinges on top six's goals, isn't it? Because body of the team, play style, works in this division. It worked very well for them last year, and it's just a matter of hitting the ball in the back of the net. So I think Falkirk is bound for a pretty good year, goal dependent, really.
Yeah, interesting you said that about Ben Crowhouse. Again, I was saying earlier about scouting with Cambridge, someone who I had my eye on a couple of times last season at Brentford. So again, like you said, it probably isn't that kind of Miller replacement, albeit I always seen him more as a number 10, floating into those half spaces, doing his best work there. And you see some of the bottom of the transfers in is very typical of maybe how John McGlynn's network looks like. So 2 from Brentford B, 1 from Blackburn under 21s, 1 from Nottingham Forest under 21s. They've signed Paul McGovern from Glenavon, 18-year-old, who I think can play centrally and play out wide. And their general age profile looks pretty decent, so their prospects are somewhere in that 18 to 23 range. And then obviously the older players, which I don't know if you're aware, but when Falkirk got promoted from the Championship to the Prem, I believe they only had one player who was outside of peak ages for a senior player. So they had a lot of people between 23 and 30. The one player that they had outside of that was someone they signed in January who made a massive impact. That was Scott Arfield. So he came in, scored a lot of goals in that season, which took them over the line. But what they had was a squad of players who were at that kind of peak age. They were ready to kick on. They just needed all the ingredients to put that together, and McGlynn managed to find a way. But he's very good at developing young talent as well as adding them to the squad, but a squad who has plenty of miles on the clock, who, are seasoned vets inside and out, but still have enough to go on to maybe have one more move. It's a very Jamestown way to look at things, where they pick people up at 25, 26. They get 2 good years out of them, but they're still at an age where they can go and sell them on. So it'll be interesting to see how he managed to make the blend work this season.
So the first 2 teams we've spoke about are teams I had a good bit of interest about coming into this summer anyway. Like, how would they do? How would they replace this? Could Falkirk kick on? That kind of thing. One team that's totally come out of left field and really maybe caught my imagination is a bit strong, but I think are billing themselves up to have a pretty memorable season, or maybe quite a sharp uplift from where they were last year. And that is Kilmarnock. Kilmarnock appointed Neil McCann last year, former Rangers manager, as I like to refer to him as. And it's been very clear the style of play he's been trying to bring in this summer window. They've been recruiting lots of bodies in the forward positions, retained the likes of Tishbola, even brought back Mark O'Hara back down the road. And Kilmarnock, I think, quietly have built a really strong front line. And we mentioned before about Falkirk needing goals, maybe cracked it. I think Kilmarnock have bought a lot of goals in this summer window. And I think out of nowhere, like, they could be one of those kind of weirdly like super attacking teams that always are getting in amongst a couple of goals a game. And Neil McCann, again, I can't really talk to the whole Dundee time he was there on too much. I couldn't say I was following it too closely, but from my experience of paying attention to him, does try and play like good football in air quotes, is trying to score goals, is trying to win games. And with the new pitch and stuff like that, Kilmarnock have had a few good little generations over the last 10 years with the likes of Steve Clark and I forget the other guy that was before Steve Clark, but of course Derek McInnes isn't too far out the picture as well for a bit of success there in recent times. But none of those teams were really that fun. They weren't really that exciting. And I'm sure like winning's winning and finishing high in the table is always good, don't get me wrong. But this feels like a little bit different for Kelly, doesn't it?
It does. Neil McCann's one of these people, when you hear him talk about Scottish football, you can tell that he knows his stuff. Some people don't like him, I think, just because he sits on a certain side of the old firm persuasion. But if you actually just look at the context of his words, he is, one, really enthusiastic about football. You can tell that straight off the bat. And two, like you said, he's got a very clear identity of how he wanted to play. I think it was against Celtic. I can't remember if it was Celtic or Rangers. When I think it was Celtic, because I seem to remember Kelly really taking it to Celtic. I think John Giles scored. Celtic, I think, it was a Araujo goal the last minute.
Yep.
To win the game, and it was a great game to watch as a neutral. It was fantastic to watch. They look as likely to score 4 as they are to concede 4, and I think that'll carry on to this season. Where we maybe slightly differ, and I think I'm different from a lot of people here. A lot of people have been pipped up for really big things this season. I'm slightly worried myself, if I'm being honest. So just looking at the recruitment, just looking at the outs first of all. So you lose the experience of like Liam Polworth, Brad Lyons, Lewis Mayo. Obviously, you lose Mayo and Lyons to a direct rival. You lose your biggest prospect to Bolton, I believe, for nothing. I'm assuming there'll be compensation of maybe like 600k or whatever. And they've just sold Dominic Thompson, who, whilst not remarkable, I was fairly impressed by most of the times that I've seen him. They had obviously Ben Brannan break in last season, but he's found himself at Queen's Park on loan. Now, I'm not going to say that's a mismanagement of a player, but when he came onto the scene at the start of last season, you're thinking this boy's going to be an absolute world beater. And he's managed to find himself there. And then 2 of the bigger ones, well, maybe 3 of the bigger ones, I guess, when you look at Marley Watkins, who never really scored you goals, but always put in a decent shift. Matty Kennedy, who I heard the other day had actually retired at 31, but I'm not sure if that's completely accurate or not.
Wow.
Definitely seems like the type of player who would have another move in him, but potentially injuries or whatever. And then the big one for me was Bruce Anderson, who, again, if you look at a lot of stats across the board, he's a player who never managed a lot of minutes, but seemed to have a big impact in the minutes that he did play. He's always been fairly potent in front of goal, and he's for a team like Killie, he's always going to be good for maybe somewhere between like 5 and 10 goals a season. Once you start getting contributions from midfield, all that kind of stuff, that can be quite valuable, especially when you find yourself, say, for example, in a bottom 6 split where 2 or 3 goals in 6 games become really, really important goals. And that's where you need those type of players. When you have a look at who they've signed, there's a lot of players there with potentially high ceilings, but it's maybe not as proven as what last season, what they had. So some of the proven ones, which I think are good signings, Mark O'Hara brings a wealth of experience. He's played for Kilmarnock before, and as is Aaron Tishbola. So 2 who are fairly liked by the Kilmarnock faithful, but 2 who can still operate at a decent level, 30 and 31 respectively. Callum Ferry's coming as a backup goalkeeper, someone who had an outstanding game against Rangers in the cup game that they played. So he's shown that, again, he's someone that can come in and deputise for Max Striek, who will hopefully have an injury-free season this year. He's been quite unlucky with injuries previously, and is certainly a decent goalkeeper on his day. And someone, again, who I watched last season, Eric Ring, I was quite impressed with. He's someone he can almost play as a number 10, a left winger. He can play as a left wing back. He's very versatile. Someone who definitely catches the eye and has had quite an interesting path through football. So he's one that I'd definitely keep my eye on. But I'd love to guess that it's Ewan Owen up front, but it might not be.
Yeah.
20 years old, coming from Barrytown. That's a big step up. I can't say I've heard much about Rashawn Matherin. And outside of that, again, Bailey Rice is the one that I think could really be a game changer. And a lot of people in Scotland will be hoping that, even from like a youngster point of view, that this is a guy who was held in as high a regard, if not higher regard, than Lennon Miller. And 100 games later for Lennon Miller, and basically no games later for Bailey Rice, he finds himself still finding his feet in Scottish football. Now, at 19, he's got plenty of room to develop. And I think having a coach like Neil McCann, who showed last season with Finlay Curtis, he's more than willing to give those players a game if he thinks they're good enough. However, so far in the League Cup, I noticed he's been subbed off before the hour mark in a few of the games. It could just be because he's new to the team, but I would expect if he was having outstanding performances, he'd have maybe seen the full 90 a little bit more than what he has done. So I'm maybe not quite as high on the team. I have also seen, obviously, just across the back there, George Stanger, decent defender, Robbie Dees, decent defender, but I wouldn't say there's a lot of, so you might see it being quite a direct style for a manager who doesn't necessarily want to play direct, or it might force them to go direct. And again, we were just talking about Bailey Rice there. He seems like the kind of player to me who is going to want to try and get on the ball, and obviously he's going to be there to break up play as well. But will that style necessarily be suited to someone like him? I'm not certainly so sure.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how they do mix that midfield up, because you feel that O'Hara, I'm pretty sure I've seen he's been installed as vice captain. Greg Kelty's been confirmed as captain for the year. So you imagine O'Hara coming in, prime of his career, 30, 31, just won the League Cup at St Mirren and whatnot. He's going to be starting 99% of the matches. Kiltie's probably the same, and Kiltie can play wide, but I think when you look at the League Cup, again, having not watched the matches, just looking at the way things are set up, he's been a bit number 10-ish amongst anything else. And it's interesting what you say about Ring, right? Because when they signed him, I looked at all his preview stuff of everything he did in England and looked very much like that kind of left winger, maybe number 10. But when I was looking at the lineups and the results in the League Cup, I think they Falkirk played him at right back for a game or two. So I've moved him over to the right wing here. Maybe they fancy him as right wing depth. I think the right back thing might have been an injury related piece of cover he was brought in for. But between the boy Ring, I like Kiltie as well. I think he's good for the league. The boy Mathurin is all right as well. He comes from Slovakian football or something. He's did halfway okay. But Owen, young player of the year in Wales. John Jules out of the Arsenal Academy. We all seen how well Hugo did last year. And then this boy Silencio and Daniels. I think there's a lot of goals in this team. Just a lot. And like I say, if they are going direct, a lot of these guys seem pretty nippy, interchangeable. Maybe one will hang wide and they can mix it up a little bit through the middle. But I think the main worry I've got for them is they have literally 5 defenders in their squad. Talk about playing with fire. If something can go wrong, it probably will, is how I feel about these situations. So they're definitely in desperate need of some more cover. I've been out of town for a few days. Maybe I'm missing a guy, but it won't be more than that. So, yeah, I think it will be interesting for Kelly. Interesting how you think about the lack of ball playing ability out from the back. Do you not think maybe your O'Haras or your Rice are the ones that will carry that water? Maybe they're just going to just give it to them and let them progress the ball. Or do you think that kind of maybe having to clear the lines, do you think that'll be quite prominent for them as the season gets going when they're under pressure then?
What I'm hoping is Neil McCann will come out and say, so say for example, they build with a back four. If they do play that kind of shape, maybe one of those players, especially O'Hara, someone who I was actually listening to a podcast recently, they were saying with that congestion in the midfield, you might see Mark O'Hara at right back, and then in possession being someone who can maybe invert into like a central position, which may help with build-up. Obviously, very accomplished on the ball and very experienced, so that might help the problems out. If not, you might see something like one of those players drop between the two centre-backs. Give you a 3 to build, but obviously having someone who in the centre is a bit more proficient on the ball, who can help them actually build out at that point. So that's something I'd quite like to see them do. I would like to see them stay attacking because, like you said, I think that's Neil McCann's sort of style. And obviously, I think everybody would like to see John Jules stay fit. He's one of those players that seems to have had quite a tough road in football. Like you said, a really big prospect as a kid and never really found his feet. And then you've seen it just click into life under Neil McCann, scoring goals for fun. He was more of a centre mid number 10, then converted into a striker, and obviously had that horrible injury, maybe even in the same game that I was talking about earlier. And since then, now the question is, can he come back to that? I don't think he's really set the heather alight yet this season, but he's someone that showed he had so much quality last year that that's something they should look to. And like you said, yeah, Owen, decent sign. Hugo up top, well, he really showed his quality come the end of the season. A player who decent pedigree. A lot of these players just need to a home type of thing, and I think Kilmarnock's the type of team that can offer them that all at ages where they could essentially go again another transfer. So it'll be interesting one to watch. I think you'll see many boring Kilmarnock games this season. However, I'm still hesitant. I think they need to do a little bit more work in the window. If they do that, there's no reason they can't be challenging for the top 6. But as it stands right now, I would have them sort of pegged in that contention, but maybe just falling out. I don't see them in any relegation trouble though.
I think the defence is the difference between if they have a top 6 kind of comfortable berth or they're kind of flirting with that kind of 7th spot a bit more perhaps. I make you quite right there. The next team I wanted to kind of jump to is Dundee United, who, when we're talking about style of play, I think Jim Goodwin has been around the league long enough for everyone pretty much knows what his go-to move is and how he generally sets the team up. But Dundee United, they've done some interesting business so far in this window. They've definitely, I don't know if they've really went out into left field with the recruitment. Like you said, some of them have came from down in Australia, and that's a path that's been well trodden over the last couple of years, Australia to Scotland. But some of the moves that they've been bringing in and some of the kind of shouts that they've been, I've been hearing from Dundee United fans for the players that have been playing well and how they might kick on this year. No European football to contend with. We know it's a bit of a kryptonite for Dundee United. If they've had one good season, they probably won't follow up the next year. So it's one of those ones where maybe this will work in their favour this time around. But Dundee United, like you mentioned Tate before, I think he's a big addition in there, a good bit of zest and pep. Never mind the boys down from Australia. Could Dundee United be a bit of a dark horse in this one? Could they be like the Motherwell of this year, where they're like in the mix and everyone's like, oh, how did that happen?
I'm kind of glad you said that because it means that we're kind of on the same train of thought. So I'm not saying it's necessarily going to be Dundee United, but I think a few of the teams in the league feel a little bit undercooked at the moment. Now, there is a month left in the transfer window, and Scotland tends to do business notoriously late. However, based on what Dundee United have done so far, and based on what I've seen in the League Cup, there's no reason that they can't be one of those teams that actually breaks out, because there tends to be one, maybe even two a season. So, yes, I definitely think they can be. First thing I wanted to touch on, just some of the outs, because last season, or even the last couple of seasons, Dundee United felt very much like a scattergun approach to recruitment. If they're able to sign players from all over the continent, then great. But does that necessarily lead to a cohesive squad? Has it led to them having a lot of deadwood that they probably didn't need? I would probably edge on yes. So look at some of the outs. Obviously, Craig Sibbald, essentially, if we call that a swap deal for Dylan Tate, you're bringing the age profile down, which seems to make sense. Ryan Strain, someone who came in with a lot of pedigree, done really well at St Mirren, but has been unavailable essentially to play. He's been injured all the time. They've let him go. A really good, I'll come back to one player on there. Trapanovsky, again, good start, and then just lost his way. I think he came in with Babunski, who everyone seemed to think was going to be like revolutionary because he'd been at Barcelona as a kid, and then again after a few games seemed to tail off. They had Johnny Russell in there weirdly, which was just a little. And then importantly as well, so two keepers there, Dave Reynard Brewer, two backup keepers off the wage bill who never looked like they were able to actually adequately deputise when they came in. Goalkeeper was a huge problem for Dundee United last season. And Ivan Dolcek, who maybe is a bit of a stinger. I think he's went on to have a decent transfer, a good age, and someone who had reasonable impact through the whole season. So that's maybe one that they want to keep a hold of. One they definitely would have wanted to keep a hold of, but looks like he's going to be a real talent, is Lucas Stevenson, who has kind of ended his love affair finally with Dundee United. One who was linked with the old firm, maybe more of a loan deal from Liverpool, but I believe he's moved on to Bolton now on a permanent basis. So he's someone that obviously really caught the eye with his energy. So someone that they will miss. But if they do change shape, which looks like Jim Goodwin might do, which is quite something that I don't think anybody really expected, because he was really married to this back three. But if it is something that changes shape, I think they might get away with it. The last one I wanted to leave for the outs, really one just to keep an eye on. Owen Sturton made a really good start to life at Ayr United. 19 years old, he's a massive talent from the academy, one that Dundee United, they seem to fall in the trap a lot of English teams coming and poaching their talent before they can even get them in the first team. And obviously they have great pedigree throughout the years with Andy Robertsons, Ryan Galls, Stuart Armstrongs, etc., etc. So one who's went out to Ayr under a manager who, again, has managed to get a lot out of strikers at Stenhousemuir. I'll definitely be worried when he comes and plays Dunfermline next season, but it'll be one that I'll be keeping an eye on from that point of view, because I think he can make that step up again. Now, if we just talk on the ins, some of the ones from Australia are nice and easy for me to talk about. I think the pick of the bunch is Jesse Randall. I watched Dundee United's game in the League Cup, and his chance creation was just so high. He's a typical winger, so he pulls out of those wide areas and can get 1v1. He is not afraid to have a shot, so he manages to get plenty of efforts on target and work the keeper. And he's just someone who I think will excite fans. He's at a really good age, 23. Auckland, who had success in the league last season, they do the league a bit weird over here where they have the playoffs and stuff like that. But he was certainly, as you can see there on the stats, he was definitely a standout winger in the A-League last year. And one that I'd be really excited about. I don't think, if he has a good season, he's one that I think will get a move on fairly quickly. I think if we have a look at Zach Sapsford from last season as well with Dundee United, he's another one that I think he's benefited from that exposure at this level. If he keeps going at the same clip that he goes at, these are players who are coming in here for a stepping stone to the next level. And Dundee United are quite happy to let them do that, I think, as long as they get adequately compensated. We were talking about the goalkeepers earlier, so last season they didn't have really anybody hanging their hat on. Both goalkeepers there are two established Premiership goalkeepers. So Walton, who has obviously been at Dundee United before, that's a real coup getting him in from Preston. Someone who was like highly thought of, but just couldn't quite break in. At 28 as well, peak year for a goalkeeper. I think it's an excellent signing. And Jordan Amissa, who has had a really Borussia Dortmund as a kid, then ended up in the English ranks and was all about his dual nationality, German and Ghanaian, I believe. And he had a really excellent spell at Ross County. Again, a team who conceded a lot of shots, so it's easy to look good. He went down south, maybe not quite worked out at Burton for him, and he's come back up the road. So that is a really competitive two that you've got in goal. And I think that the defence is only going to take confidence from having those two there. Other ones on the ins, so Lockie Rose up front, very much reminds me of Chris Kane, now at Dunfermline, but was at St Johnstone. Just a workhorse. I would say probably more potent than Chris Kane, but someone who will absolutely work his socks off in that front line. You've got someone like Sapsford, who's an excellent presser as well. Dundee United are going to have lots of energy when I think last season one of the criticisms was their three at the back looked a bit stodgy at times, maybe a little bit safe. I think they're really going to unlock that with these new signings here.
I think so too. I've really liked the look of the boys that have come in, Randall and Lockie Rose, as you called them there, Lachlan Rose. Definitely. The thing with Dundee United last year, I just had never seen them scoring goals. We thought maybe they could keep it tight at the back and maybe stuff a game out, Jim Goodwin style, but you just didn't feel that they were really going to score much. And I know they had some high scoring games, don't get me wrong, but you just didn't really feel it was in them. I think one of the signings I've been most not impressed by, but let's say excited about from a Dundee United perspective, is the centre back Forbes. He's a Northern Ireland youth international, comes from a pretty good background. And Jim Goodwin, since he's been in the building, has said this guy's a leader. This guy's a really big part of our defence. And like you were saying there about the stodgy kind of the back three, whether it be like Eovus and Graham's and can't remember the other guys that they had in last year. This guy's a bit more, I don't know, I can see this guy maybe being like outside of Glasgow or outside of the top three teams or whatever, maybe one of the best centre backs in the league if he fulfills a bit of potential and he is that kind of leader at the back alongside Ross Graham. And then to couple that with a number 10 guy, Mergum, who went a wee bit wayward, went around for some sign-on bonuses and for some wages, I think, but was a really good performer in Ligue 2 in France like 2 years ago. And if he is to like arrive in the team and actually play for them, could be a real level up player, but really brings like your Randalls, your Sapsfords, your Rose together. They've got a bit of an attacking unit all of a sudden that they've not really had outside of like target man Dolchek or whatever the plan was before. So quite like the Forbes and the Mergen move. I think I'll come back to you on the goalkeepers a little bit. Is it a better, again, outside the top three teams or however you want to put the asterisks on this, is that the best goalkeeper department in the league in terms of the quality of number 1 and 2?
It's certainly going to be up there. I think we have obviously spoke about Falkirk. I think they've got a very strong unit in terms of how they want to play. So obviously Hogarth can play with the ball, but is a really good shot stopper. And Scott Bain's excellent with the ball and a decent shot stopper. So they've got a really strong unit in there. Off the top of my head, obviously, like you said, I'm assuming you're meaning like outside of Glasgow. But even at that, if we're talking about a unit, as in like a 1 and 2 who can challenge himself, I think Dundee United have certainly got a really good balance in there. I also just noticed as well, they've just announced, I don't know if it was just announced, but on the day that we were recording, they've announced Daniel Benny, a left winger from QPR, who I believe he was a Perth Glory youth. So they picked him up. He's also eligible for Scotland still. And he's one that QPR have essentially, as much as Dundee United have used the A-League system, QPR have used it quite fruitfully to pick up free agents over here. So some of the youth players, let's look at Perth Glory, for example, they picked up one of the strikers from here. He was only 18, so he was on an amateur contract, so they're able to basically pick him up for buttons. And this is obviously people who they're nurturing through their under 23s. You can see the type of level that they can come over. They can attract someone like Daniel Benny to come over, loan him out to someone like Dundee United, and he's going to be playing, I believe, on that left. And I believe he's got a good bit of pace about him as well. So maybe give you that extra option for the last 20-30 off the bench. And one we didn't even speak about was Metsoko, which, again, a bit of an interesting one. He's only on loan for the season, but from Victoria Pilsen, so a bit of an interesting profile in terms of where he's came from. They've got a lot of talent across that attacking line. Can they put it all together? Can they keep everybody happy? Are we getting excited because it's shiny players from over the continent again? Maybe. It doesn't seem quite as scattergun though. It seems a little bit more of a tailored approach this season. And I think it can only do Dundee United good.
Yeah, I think he's won some plaudits as well in his short time in Dundee already. And the last kind of Jim Goodwin quote I kind of caught before we came on. Obviously, I've seen the Benny stuff right before we came on. Sorry for not adding them on the board sooner. But it feels like maybe Will Ferry is not leaving for the Czech Republic anytime soon. Some Celtic interest has been around, but Goodwin's on quote. He's been quoted by Sky or whoever was I'm sure it was Sky, and saying like, "Oh, I'm really glad we still got him. It maybe sounds like Jim Goodwin's confident they'll keep him for this year." And he was a really important player for them. We're chatting about the importance of replacing that kind of vacuum of top level players out the building. And I don't think Dundee United have experienced this, but you did say there's a big list of outgoings there. And Will Ferry, player who was player of the year last year and really came in clutch towards the back end of the season. Losing him would be a wind out the sails moment. So I think that's a big one if they can keep a hold of him. But the boy Namo, or not, yeah, Namo,
Yeah,
him and Josh Rollins, like they're both very well regarded. So, like, kind of looking at the Dundee United team, like it's all about putting it into practice, kind of what we said earlier. But really, you look at this squad, maybe a bit of depth or whatever, but it kind of has a bit of everything you want, I think, doesn't it?
I really like it. I really like it on paper, which almost feels like it's definitely going to fall on its face in practice. But
Totally.
you were saying about Will Ferry there. I believe he was in the top 3 creators in the league last season, if not the top 4. Obviously, Dundee United with that 3 at the back, very reliant on those wing backs providing crosses into the middle. This season, if he is playing as an out-and-out left back, he'll still have license to get forward, but he's also an intelligent player. He can go inside as well. He's certainly one that's comfortable on the ball. He added a couple of goals to his game, which I think said himself was something that he wanted to add a bit more end product in that respect. So if they can hold on to him, then great. The only thing I will say, contract expires at the end of this season, so it might be one of those where they could take $1.5 million, maybe 2 million now, or risk losing it for nothing. And a team like Dundee United, I think if that kind of money's on the table, it's something they've certainly got to consider. And I think, as and when we talk about Celtic, of course, they're going to need left back cover. I think it's a transfer that makes a lot of sense for Celtic to go and make, especially since they've not bothered going to get Marcelo Sirachi back.
I'm with you there on it looks really good to me, and I think it should work out. So it probably somehow doesn't happen. I think that is very Scottish football. And when I think about that, the number one team that springs to my mind, and probably a lot of you guys back at home, is Aberdeen. So I just caught a wee bit of a cough, wee bit of the hay fever's hit me. Aberdeen, you mentioned earlier, Lewis Mayo and Brad Lyons leaving Kilmarnock. They've went to Aberdeen. Stephen Robinson, been around the league, I think been probably one of the best managers in the league for a couple of years as well. Maybe not everyone's a total fan of his style and that kind of thing, but for Aberdeen to add him into the building, Mayo and Lyons are like tertiary to the business they've done, right? But still all well being equal, like good experience in the division. But they've really pushed the boat out this year, basically rebuilt their midfield. Feels like they're going to keep a hold of Nisbet, which I think is giganormous, massive. And then the other signings they've put around that, Smith, Olasanya, Yogan, I think Aberdeen really, like that. Is this the year Aberdeen really become Aberdeen again and are like an actual kind of force in the division again? Similar to Dundee United, I look at their team, Hendo, and what are they missing? Nothing. They've got everything here at their fingertips now.
Well, we've spoken previously about some of the transfer business that's happened. Aberdeen very much feels like one that they've tried to raise the floor rather than try and break through the ceiling. Aberdeen are a team who seem to constantly punch below their weight, despite the fact that they lose a lot of money. They have a lot of money within the club. I was quite shocked to see their team value being, I think, before Motherwell had sold the players. Motherwell had essentially created more team value in one season than Aberdeen have managed to do since they really committed to a player trading model, if you want to call it that. So there's 2 trains of thought here. I agree with you in terms of Stephen Robinson's come in and he's done what he needs to do to get Aberdeen back on track, to essentially be a big club again. Players that know the league, have plenty of experience and that he's worked with before. For example, Connor Ronan, I believe he had him at St Mirren. He was excellent there. He's went away and had a decent career and come back. Definitely one that, when I was watching him, I was very impressed how he moves into those half spaces, especially ones in the wide areas. He's got so much quality on the ball that if they can manage to get a clipped cross from there, or if he can manage to cut inside and get a shot away, I think that's going to be so fruitful for Aberdeen in the season. Olasanya, obviously be keen to get him back in, bags of pace, always a threat, maybe not the most clinical, but definitely someone who's going to work in a hard-working Stephen Robinson system. They've went down south, so they picked up like Dan Happ, Guinness Walker on the left. We've said about Lewis Mayo and Brad Lyons again too. Let's call him stalwarts of the league. Brad Lyons, peak age, like he's going to give you the next couple of years, probably his best years of his career. And then they have still got a couple of wild cards in there as well. Lewis Smith and Tony Yogan, both again in the league last season, both at a fairly young age profile. Lewis Smith 26, Yogan only 20. And then I believe they've essentially replaced Mitov. I think they're anticipating him leaving with Marius Muller. The only person I've not obviously seen a lot of is Ayud Malua. So that'd be the only player on there. And I guess Alexander Bredel, who comes with decent pedigree, I would say, from the Austrian league. But of course, some of the things in terms of the outs, obviously Graham Shinney, a big one, leaving, being a leader in the dressing room, going back to Inverness. Alexander Jensen, just someone who it just didn't seem to work out for him. He was very much a Jimmy Tilleen signing. on paper looked decent, stats-wise looked decent. If you watched him in games, he just looked lightweight, he looked kind of lost in there. Just one that never settled, and sometimes in football that happens. I jotted down that they got 1.3 million euros for Topi Keskinen, who obviously came in as a project player, and I think it's kind of symptomatic of what Aberdeen have failed to do. So he came in and you thought, this guy looks really promising, had a really good start, fell away, sort of played out of position, then not playing, and yes, 1.3 million looks fine, but one, it's below what his market value is ranked at. Two, they paid $1 million for him, so they've only made a small profit. And three, it's actually the highest sale that they've had since Bojan Miovski left the club, which was back in 2024-25. Now, Dave Cormack come out and said Aberdeen are reliant on this player trading model. They put Lewis Ferguson through, Miovski, Ramadani, amongst a few others. But like I said, that's actually their 10th biggest sale of all time. That to me is somewhat worrying for an off-the-field perspective. So yes, they're bringing in players who know the league. Yes, they're bringing in experienced players, but I'm thinking about that next step. Are they really creating a lot of value? Or are they going to be Aberdeen at the end of the season who are looking at a £7-8 million loss again, or whatever it is that they might be looking at? Now, as long as Dave Cormack's willing to cover that, then fine. But if you're talking about, are Aberdeen a club that are run efficiently? I'm not so sure they are.
That's a great point you raised, because as much as like the team, like Yogan, Smith, these guys all profile very well in the division and could be quite sneaky moves. I think like the success we've seen of Fadinger last year at Motherwell, Breedle's a very similar player, more defensive minded though. Fadinger's a bit more box to box. I think you can see a good translation from the Austrian Bundesliga into the SPFL with him again. Martin Moorman, another one, went to Motherwell, we mentioned previously. But Connor Ronan's one I think could be like the Elliot Watt, or the whatever you want to think of him of the season, could be one of the best midfielders going. To be a good player in MLS, you have to have really good technique, you have to be a good athlete. There's just no two ways about it. The previous experience he has in the league is massive, and I think Ronan is one that's there. But Breedle, Ronan, Hap, Yogan, I don't see them selling them like Miovski or any of these types of players. Like you say, are they really the added value into the team? I would probably agree with you and say, no, they probably haven't this year. But I think if you're at Aberdeen, I think you're banking on this catching fire again and really being dead prolific, and maybe cashing in on that potentially. So, but yes, it's a very interesting point you raised. I never really thought about it from that POV, because I look at this and I know it is maybe a bit more back four rather than back five with Aberdeen, but they do basically have two to a man everywhere, like for whatever system they want to play. And for the level of the depth they've got between, I was thinking about this with the Dundee United goalkeepers, but across like their midfield, their front three, there's not many teams in the league that have got an A and a B of the kind of level that Aberdeen are kind of flexing here at the moment. So with Robinson, who I know who is not really like flamboyant or like his teams when they're on form are hammering everyone or anything that far from it, but he is successful enough in the league, and yeah, maybe they're just after a wee bit of, we want to be top six, we want to be like Hearts and Motherwell and everyone's speaking about us and look what Aberdeen are up to. And I think if that is the agenda, they've recruited quite well for it. But when you said at the tip off of this segment with Dundee United, if it looks good on paper, should do great, but for some reason, because I think that it probably won't happen, I always just think about Aberdeen, because remember this time last year, they signed Jesper Karlsson and Dylan Lazetic from AC Milan and stuff like oh, Aberdeen really mean business here, man. Some of these players are proper players. Jesper Karlsson, I don't get why that never really worked out. I'm sure there's someone with a gossip if they want to share it. But I look at this squad and like there's no real reason for any of these guys not to at least deliver crosses, runs, like whatever they've been profiled for. They've got the ingredients to have a pretty good team. The Beatov thing, be interesting to see how that goes. I don't think he'll be hanging about. Just feels inevitable. Stephen Robinson, just for the record as well, was quite forthcoming in the sense of like Aberdeen were allowing him to spend before they sold. So we've seen a lot of this business come in quite quickly in the window. Aberdeen were very active very quickly. And then ever since then, it's kind of slowed down, and you've seen some players leave, like Milanovic and a few others here and there as well. I kind of like how they've approached the window in that sense, where they've tried to like build the team, and then we'll deal with balancing the books later once we've got our team put together. So a lot to like about Aberdeen, but they let their fans down a few times, I think, with false hope and promise, haven't they? So maybe not get too ahead of ourselves. I think they're a good shout, a safe shout for top six. Do you feel the same?
I would agree. I think they are a safe shout. I think you will see another few of the Jimmy Talleen era players just get phased out and sold. One other thing, I guess it's worth noting, 15 years old, the youngest player to ever play for Aberdeen. an explosive striker, is how he's been kind of described as. But you were saying about Kevin Nisbet, obviously, well, not obviously, but I support him. Dunfermline, I seen the best of Kevin Nisbet. He was outstanding. He had every kind of goal in his locker. And I think, to be honest, he gets unnecessary stick. He's nearly a 1-2 striker at Aberdeen, or a 1 goal every 2 game type striker. And watching them in the Cup, yes, I know that the League Cup is against lower opposition. I think Aberdeen were the only, or maybe one of the groups that didn't, maybe they just had all lower league teams, whatever it was. But the way they played was so different to what you've seen from Stephen Robinson. And my knowledge has always been Stephen Robinson's never necessarily been a 3 at the back manager. He just happens to have a team in St Mirren who clearly have a bottom 3 budget every year, and he's managed to get them top 6. So if that's successful, why would he go and change it? I believe he's always really wanted to implement a style of play that's maybe not necessarily been attached to his name. And in saying that, what I was really impressed by was the fact he managed to get the full-backs pulling nice and wide, opening up those kind of half-space channels, and that's where you find people like Connor Ronan making those third-man runs into there, being very dangerous. And all someone like Kevin Nisbet needs is service. They managed to get the ball into the box for him more than what they maybe have done over the past season. And that's, I think he's got 6 goals in the 4 League Cup games, which is very impressive. And the other thing to note, looked very strong on set pieces, a variety of front and back post deliveries, a couple of goals in the League Cup from set pieces, something that I wouldn't have associated with a Jimmy Tulane Aberdeen. Whether the stats say that or not is not something that comes to my head. So it'll be interesting to see how they get on this season in terms of that. But yes, I would say a very safe shout for top 6. I think they'll be in and around where Motherwell are. Like I said, obviously Dundee United might be pushing for that. But like we said, I think Aberdeen's floor has risen to the point where we can safely say that there's going to be a benchmark of performance that we're going to get out of someone like Stephen Robinson's team. So top 6 for me.
In that same vein of Aberdeen, when I'm thinking about teams in this window that have seen the mistakes of last year and tried to act quite quickly to prepare for this year, one of the teams that quite quickly jumps to my mind on this kind of front has been Rangers. Been quite impressed by how they've went around the transfer window so far this year. I'm yet to add in Dragojevic since I've been away and whatnot, but I know they've not maybe done huge numbers in terms of like actual headcount or whatnot to this point. They would probably expect to sell some other players. But I think overall, the kind of level that they've added into the squad, I think Rangers have made themselves a lot better dead easily. This year, we've still got some other kind of pieces of guys that might leave and that sort of thing. But yeah, I got the real feeling, I've mentioned this a bunch of times, and I promise this will be the last time I do mention it, but there was an interview with that Andrew Kavanagh, I think his name is. It was before the cup final, but after the league was done. And he just seemed raging that they were in third. You know, he was happy to acknowledge the things that like went against him and whatever, like having to change manager and this, that, and the other thing. But he was dead quick to say, we don't make excuses and we move forward. And next year, you know, we'll be spending the same budget regardless of where we finish this year. And our job is to put Rangers back on top. And I said at the time, like, that man believes every word he's saying. He is raging. And you can feel that there's like a concerted approach. There will be a concerted approach to put them back in amongst it a bit stronger than what they were last year. I think McCausland isn't far for the exit door either. But the business they've done, like Godfrey, like let's see how well he does, right? Guys like this that are injury prone. He could be Vickers or he could be Nat Phillips or Ben Davis or something. We'll be somewhere in that scale. Let's see where he lands. But Dan Neil, I think, is a hugely impressive signing. Dragojevic is basically a wonder kid for all intents and purposes. But then when you add in those kind of fabric players, which for me, like, it's a big thing Rangers have been missing for the last however long you want to think of it. McCrory, maybe Devlin's not quite that, but knows the league certainly, and Shankland and McInnes. I think there's a big page turn moment happening here for Rangers with Tavernier leaving, and they've had a bit of a generational kind of cull over the last season or two anyway, with the likes of Goldson and Balogun and all these other guys that were hanging around forever doing nothing. They're all kind of gone now. And the squad's still quite thin here as you see it on the depth and whatnot. Again, similar to Aberdeen, I think he was allowed to buy before they've sold Raskin, and maybe Chermiti or somebody else could still go. I think Bajrami's very close to leaving from reports I seen yesterday, in fact. But yeah, I think Rangers are probably out of the top 3 from last year. I think they've improved their squad the most at this point before we get a ball kicked as we record this the day before. Pandur's a big keeper as well, which me and you know Pandur pretty well from different stuff and whatnot. How do you feel about Rangers? Have they done how much? Have they got more to do? Have they done enough? Do you think they've upgraded as much as I think they have? How do you see it?
I do, I agree. I like the style of signing, and I think it might play into what I predict the type of style would be. We know what Derek McInnes does. He likes to play 4-4-2. He likes to play man-for-man press, and he's very effective at doing so. And I think what you might see, because one of the things right now they're saying, Rangers have 8 or 9 centre mids on the books or whatever, how are they going to fit them into a two-man midfield? When you're fighting on multiple fronts, you need to have depth first and foremost, but it's the characters that you've got in there. So Devlin, really like press leader, someone who broke up the play really well last season. Dan Neil, captain Sunderland throughout basically the whole of their ascent up the leagues. Ross McCrory, someone who you know for a fact puts in an absolute power of work, Rangers fan, Rangers youth, all this kind of stuff. And of course, Shankland announces the captain, someone who, yes, he isn't a presser, but you know exactly what kind of quality he's going to have, especially as someone who can provide a bit of a link for Chimiti. I sometimes felt like Nadiri done a lot of hard work, but was he able to actually link the play and create chances for Chimiti? I'm not so sure. So having someone like Shankland in there makes a lot of sense. What I think you might see, I think he's used it maybe a little bit. You've got such an athletic talent in Tour Romans on the left-hand side. You may see this kind of lopsided formation where Rangers actually play a centre mid on the right. That becomes, they maybe tuck over as a 3 in midfield when they build. Roman just goes high up the pitch and they use a kind of overload on that left-hand side to create chances. I would not be shocked to see something like that. And yes, you alluded to Ivor Pandur there, someone that we know very well. A keeper who is very much stylistically, I think, what Rangers needed. So Jack Butland was very much in the middle where they wanted to play a possession style of football. Now, people at the club would have you believe that Jack Butland was very good with his feet. People would have you believe that Liam Kelly was even better, yet Liam Kelly never seemed to got a chance, and Jack Butland had quite a few high-profile mistakes with his feet. This is a very clear change of style. Ivor Pandur coming in, not someone who's necessarily renowned with their feet, but someone who's going to keep the ball at the back of the net. And in a Derek McInnes style side, that is exactly what they're going to need, because you're going to see some very direct play, or you're going to see them shuffle the ball out to those wide areas where they've created the overload as quickly as they can, get up the pitch, squeeze the life out of the other team, really suffocate them, and that's how they're going to get their success, not through being a really slick, build-up, heavy team. So the signings have to match the style, and I think they've done that really well. Like you said, maybe some question marks over Ben Godfrey, but at the end of the day, it's a loan deal. And then some of the outs, I think, are to make profit on that Oliver Antman, to essentially have a net of 3 million for Pandur. I believe Jack Butland was sold for about 3.5. Pandur about 6.5 brought in. And then getting people like Danilo, Ben Davies, James Tavernier, Max Aarons, Skov Olsen, Mikey Moore, all these people off the wage bill to then replace them with a slightly younger profile, someone like Dragojevic, Daniel, only 24, and obviously a very clear leader in the dressing room. What I think Rangers are missing, and I think it might come if they sell Rascan for, let's just say, 20 million, somewhere around there. So are likely to go. Barron being quoted somewhere in the 8 to 10 million mark. If they get 30 million in the coffers, I think that allows them to get those 1 or 2 superstar signings. So I'm talking someone who can maybe match Fernandez at the back, possibly on the other side. Or if Fernandez plays on the right-hand side, maybe someone who can match him on the left. And then someone in that wide area, maybe on the right-hand side, that can just provide something extra, where if they do decide to go with a more traditional formation in a game, could they have someone in there that is just outstanding? Now, I understand there's no guarantees. We all thought Skov Olsen was going to be brilliant. Will Derek McInnes necessarily go for that style of winger after seeing, for example, the success of Kazarides last season? I would think not. I would think he would go and recruit someone who either has pace, who can go at his man 1v1, who can come on for 20, 30 minutes and really make a big impact, or maybe someone who has proven end product, a la Václav Cherny, who has obviously been heavily linked. However, I believe his price is getting a little bit out of range, where Rangers not to sell on, say, for example, Rascan. So if they were to sell Rascan for 20, bring Cherny in for somewhere between 8 and 10, still have an asset like Fernandez at the back to sell and have all this talent ahead, I think it could be a very exciting season for Rangers fans.
Yeah, I think Cherny's the one name, I was going to bring that up, it's the one name that won't go away from the rumour mill, and maybe once they've topped up with some transfer ammo, that'll be a move that they try and swoop on. I think Chukwueze got a couple of goals, a couple of assists, something like that in some of the friendlies, and I think what you mentioned there with that kind of lopsided 4-4-2 thing is very Derek McInnes from last year, playing Osen McAtee in right mid, and that, or Milne, I forget what way it was round now, but that kind of lopsided midfield kind of situation that you mentioned, I could see that kind of being the way that they go as well. But they are missing, like, is that just took off like Bajrami and McCausland? I know these guys weren't really like first team players. Maybe Kasama still stays, but he's been linked to Bruges. They are missing that thing that gets you into this box. It looks like Finlay Curtis is fine, and I'm sure they'll do well. But for a Rangers team that's going to be fighting on a lot of fronts, it doesn't look like there's a lot of actual depth there outside of that centre mid area, which is just rammed full of athleticism right now. And I'm sure they'll be able to make use of a lot of it, but they definitely need a little bit more. I think that puts them in a funny position because you kind of need to play Raskin until someone buys him, because like you don't want his value going down because you're shelving him, and do you want to? So they're in a wee bit of a funny spot right now. But I think they've done a great job of, like, they're not going to be third this year. Let me just put it like that. There's no way they're finishing third this year. So, and I think that's the first thing that they wanted to address coming into the window. So, an exciting year for Rangers fans. I see a lot of Rangers fans in the comment section of this, but I think Rangers fans have been excited enough times with maybe some false dawns here and there. And I've been one of these guys that said for long enough, like, Derek McInnes should have been the Rangers manager maybe a wee while ago to bring a little bit of that domestic know-how to the party. And a lot of Rangers fans would give you pushback on that in years gone by. But it feels like they're all in unison. They're all kind of under this one umbrella of, like, this is the man for us right now. And they're all kind of pulling in that one direction. And we've seen it in football clubs when you've got that kind of vibe from the terraces onto the pitch. It does make a bit of a difference. So, yeah, Rangers, I think, will be a much more of a force this year than, not that they weren't last year, but they're all going to be third, ultimately, is kind of how I see it. Firmly up there. I think if it's funny, right? Because right before, and we'll get Celtic later on, right? But before Celtic signed Casper Ho, my kind of POV was, if the league started today, this is like a week or two ago, the Rangers, you've probably got to be our favourites. Things have maybe changed a little bit now, but not by much. But Rangers, I think, are going well and far from done in the window. Definitely still some more business to be caught up on there. We've kind of mentioned this for maybe a few of the last teams in terms of, like, false dawns or giving the fans some false hope and then kind of letting them down. I think Hibs over the last couple of years have been quite notorious for their player turnover, how many transfers have been involved in, how many different players have came through the doors, for better and for worse. This summer, and I know, like at point of recording, we need to see the second leg against Malasheva, right? But it feels like at this point, it's been a wee bit of a departure from the norm. There's been a lot less volume of turnover and a bit more concentrated and a little bit more, like, doubling down on the tactics. Eddie Gray came through sorry, I'll go back. Gray came through some real fire. He's been under fire at Hibs quite a few times, and it really did pay off for them towards the back end of the year when they got a bit of form together and really pushed into that top six mold. Feels like he's under pressure a little bit already with the European stuff that's going on. And I don't know, Hibs are one of these teams that I always find them quite weird to gauge coming into a season, because similar to some of the stuff we mentioned with some of the other teams, got a good track record of bringing in some fun players and looking like, oh, they could do something, and maybe it doesn't quite click together. I like some of the business they've done so far. I like the look of the boy Lowe. I like the boy that's coming from, is it Millwall, Mayer, the left wing back. Paslak, I thought was a good move that they made in January. The boy Kerr, obviously got good pedigree domestically. But Hibs, I don't know, like, it took them a while to do some business, and the more I was looking at them, I'm like, what is Hibs doing this year? Like, are they going to try and, like, get in amongst top 3, top 4? Are they going to try and bring in our cup home? Are they taking this Europe seriously? Like, I just don't really know how to read Hibs, is probably the best way I would sum that up.
Yeah, and Hibs have a bit of an issue in terms of, listen, in Scottish football, everybody has a shelf life, and it tends to be very short. David Gray has obviously got a hell of a lot of goodwill in the bank with Hibs fans. A lot of my friends from back home are all Hibs fans, and they would rather see a lot of things than see David Gray lose his job. However, there's two trains of thought. One is style of play and one is optics. So if we just talk about optics quickly, a third place finish almost after what was almost a disastrous start for him, where he nearly lost his job. I think he turned it around. Did they get a last minute draw, I believe? I can't remember who it was against, and that almost turned that season around. They went on an unbelievable run, finished third place, but it was a very low points threshold for third on that season. Going into last season, points were round about the same. However, Hearts find themselves nearly winning the league as their rivals, and Hibs end up finishing fifth, despite the fact they've probably not actually dropped off very much. They've had arguably a more consistent season year upon year, but like I said, the optics look worse. Then you come into something like this season, they've got off to a terrible start against Malasheva. We don't know at this point in recording if they get through or not. If they were to lose that tie, again, the optics look really bad. And it then becomes a point of, do they have confidence in David Gray going into the season? However, does he shoot himself in the foot? Yes, in my opinion anyway. The three at the back, which worked really well when you had a prime Nicky Cadden on the left-hand side, who's crossing arguably the best in the league. maybe first or second from that wing back position. And on the right hand side, obviously his brother Chris and Kenai Omega are looking like a decent prospect across the board. Really good in terms of there. Then, like you said, yeah, Paslak looks like a great signing. Nicky Gadden's still on the left-hand side. However, you can feel the drop-off year upon year where he's become less useful on that side. Obviously, Obita the same. Both wing-backs being over 30 is a big concern in terms of how much energy they're still able to give up and down the pitch. When you look at the team and they play a 3-5-2, so they have no other natural width in that team. So that, to me, is a big concern. Last season, I feel like they got really bogged down by just having a much of a muchness in midfield. Obviously, Jamie McGrath really good, but again, I think he's had some injury problems. And whilst he has been good, he's also looked a little bit lightweight. Someone like Joe Newell as club captain, kind of notoriously lightweight. Again, a decent ball player, but not someone you're going to go into the trenches with. And if you have a look around them, there's quite a lot of untested talent there, or people who have just maybe not quite made the step up, like Josh Campbell sat there. I don't know if Miguel Chai was on that chart or if he should be on there. Maybe obviously he was looking towards leaving. But he's in there as well. And Mulligan, of course, injured. A big one for them. So it's a bit of a crossroads season for David Gray. When you have a look at the business done, like you said, yeah, Jason Kerr, Hibs fan, 29 peak age, but he sat on the bench watching Grant Hanley get minutes in his legs. It just can't happen. It can't be happening at this level. Abdullah's coming from Leighton with decent pedigree. Callum Wright from Plymouth, decent pedigree. Adam Mayer, one of those, he was actually on loan at Cambridge last season. I didn't get to see a lot of him because obviously I was scouting for Cambridge rather than scouting Cambridge's games. But someone who had decent pedigree from within the club. Clearly not someone, though, that they were desperate to keep a hold of. So I don't know what that says about that. And then Nathan Lowe, I don't know if you've seen the game in Europe. Couple of big chances missed, not hitting the target, one-on-one. What I will say, good that he's getting in those positions. He looks like a big lad, but 20 years old off the back of like a fairly average loan. I'm not saying he won't be a success, but it's a hell of a lot of pressure to put on a young lad to do that. Owen Elding, the same, a young player who I would say is probably better coming in off the right and striking with the left. Thibaut Clichy, I think it was a club record signing, ended out on loan last season. And Martin Boyle still being the tried and tested starter who you probably still hang your hat on. Is that someone you really want to be hanging your hat on going into this season? I'm really not so sure that I'm that confident that they've got the squad strength there. However, what does make me feel a little bit more confident is they've lost 20 million in the last 4 seasons, or there or thereabouts. So they have owners who are willing to dig their hands into their pockets to get them to where they want to be. However, we were speaking about club efficiency earlier. Does that point to Hibs being a particularly efficient club? I would say no. When you look across the board there, have they got any players of significant value that you could see them spinning on in a few years? Maybe Elding if he develops, maybe someone like Clichy because he holds a bit of value anyway from previous. Miguel Chayo was maybe talked up for a move, but that's kind of went quiet. Outside of that, I'm not so sure they've got a lot of value there, and they're spending a lot of money to put that type of team on the table.
It's a really good point you raised. I didn't really realise the season-on-season losses that they've been stacking up. It's not surprising, given the volume that they've been picking up. I think Mulligan's maybe, like you mentioned, Shiwa, they've been holding out for a high price off a Celtic. That makes a lot more sense now. And Mulligan, I think they fancy as a player they can get a few bob for as well. So they're maybe not too far away from that break even. I think the boy Lowe, like, I don't know, I was quite impressed by him looking at his tail of the tape. And when a guy shows up and says, I'm here to be top scorer in the team, I just love stuff like that. And the guy's got some chops in that. And fair enough, in Europe, he maybe needs to keep a calmer, composed head on his shoulders. But it'll be interesting to see how it goes. I think McGrath's massive for them. I think when McGrath's in the team and when he's not, you really see a difference in Hibs' results, wins, losses, and draws. I mean, and the Abdullah, it'd be interesting to hear if you've seen this guy, you know much about him. But when I was looking at him, I thought this guy's got a really good kind of tail of the tape. He looked like he'd been pretty handy at a decent level, and maybe like a Chaiwa replacement in lieu is how I kind of thought of him. But yeah, there's not really been any miraculous signings that they've added in. Some of the teams we've looked at so far have really signed some interesting players and really went out the box to try and find solutions. And like I say with Hibs, I don't really get what they're doing. Like, the signings are nice and the players are good, don't get me wrong, but compared to some of the other teams, I just don't really feel what they're up to.
One of the other things, I was going to say 2 things, so I'm maybe a little bit stung because I seem to remember when Harry McCurdy signed for Hibs.
Okay.
I've just got the quote up there, and he said he expressed immense drive to succeed and bring his signature goal celebration to Easter Road. He was convinced he was going to score a lot. However, his time in Edinburgh was heavily disrupted by a long goal drought and health and injury battles. I don't know if he ever actually scored in the league, if at all. So he was one that came in, talked the talk, and certainly did not walk the walk. But more concerning is David Gray talks about the flexibility within his team, but actually the signings are pointing more towards not having that flexibility. So someone like Felix Paslak is very much, he can play right back, but his strengths are probably seen further up the pitch. Chris Cadden, absolutely a wing back. Nicky Cadden, absolutely a wing back. Adam Mayer, you could almost say, is a left midfielder who drops into a left wing back position. And Jordan Obita, probably more natural left back than the two of them. But at the same time, still his best work is done with his crosses, which come from that kind of deep area in the final third, though. So if they then want to switch to a back four, one, I don't think they've got the personnel out wide. But two, I'm looking at the centre backs. I'm like, is there a two in there that I'm going to be convinced can really do the job? I really don't know. I think Raphael Salinger is a decent keeper, and I think Smith is an okay deputy. He's come in and done okay. But again, there's not a lot of confidence there that Hibs are going to be able to have any kind of repeatable success across the season. And just looking across the board as it stands, maybe not a team that are going to create loads of moments either. However, like I said, they're a team that's got plenty of time. They've got another month to work in the transfer market. I'm pretty confident that they will do business, that come this time next month, we'll be thinking, okay, that's Hibs again, a team who should essentially be a top 6 team, maybe even a top 5 team.
Interesting. Yeah. I think European qualification probably says a lot for them, maybe dictates some of the transfers they can attract, some of the players they can bring into the building, as well as finances that will come their way. And maybe like Mulligan or Chaiwa, maybe they're on the hook for, we're not selling you until we're qualified. You owe us this kind of thing. Help us, guys, please. Don't leave us. Where are you going? Don't come back. Those ones. So let's see how it shakes out. In terms of a back two, I quite like Iredale. I think Iredale's a decent centre back. And the boy Kerr, like, can't say I remember him that well from when he was up here last time. I've not got a great memory for random SPFL players at centre back, but I don't know. I would struggle to think Iredale and Kerr as a back two and a back four would let you down tons. Like, seem like good guys that would pair well. Hanley's just a pure divisive figure, isn't he? Then I suppose your O'Hara's and even your Obita playing in a back three, sometimes maybe at left back in the back five. Not really your out and out centre backs. And Rocky Bashiri, of course, is a bit of a streets won't forget player in Scotland at this point, isn't he? For better and for worse at times.
He certainly is. He can certainly have a really good level of performance, but I'm not sure he's one, especially in a two, that you're going to hang your hat on. The only thing I'll say, we were talking about staleness of the three. The translated interview that came back from the Malasheva coach essentially said they knew exactly how Hibs were going to play. Something that's very predictable. Last season, Jens Bertolascu got called out because part of in fact, the key to his game plan against Hibs was letting Grant Hanley have the ball, which is a really scathing indictment. And if anyone's watching this, please try and look for this. It's something that I don't know if I just noticed, but in watching the games and then having watched Scotland a lot, Grant Hanley being involved, how often is Grant Hanley on the ground? It's actually astounding how often he is last-ditch defending. Now, there was a point in time where Grant Hanley was an excellent last-ditch defender. They had a couple of years for Scotland where he was absolutely untouchable and he was an outstanding player. I think those days have just gone. And you'll notice even I think that was the first goal that Malasheva scored. He's tried to make a last-ditch block, essentially, across the box, and he's so far away from blocking the ball. I think he's just lost that touch that he had. He's one that I'd be really concerned if he ends up as a starting centre-half for Hibs this season.
Particularly in a two.
In a two, I should say. In a three, you've always got an extra player to cover, but if he was one of the ones that was playing in a two, if they do change that shape, I would be quite worried.
Yeah. You feel quite okay for Hibs top 6. I'm on the fence. I think Martin Boyle should give you like your 10 to 15 goals to keep you in the mix. And like I say, Salinger's decent enough, but again, I just don't really get Hibs now. And I know I probably sound like an idiot keep saying that, because maybe some of you guys in the comments going, this is how you get Hibs or whatever. But yeah, I don't know. When I look at all these other teams, I can kind of see, this is where they're moving on from, or this is how they're trying to kick on. This is what they're trying to do. And maybe the qualifier comes into the mix a bit, some of the other stuff we've mentioned. But yeah, like I just don't see advancement. I think some of the moves that they've brought in are nice, they're maybe complementary. They maybe kind of add to maybe some of the stuff you're chatting about before, squad value. Like Nathan Lowe, if he can score 10 to 15 goals, he adds some value to the books. Maybe the boy Wright is in a similar vein. I know he's well regarded in that attacking midfield area, although I'm sure he picked up an injury. And maybe an Abdullahi could be like your Elliot Watt kind of figure from last year or whatever it might be. So maybe it'll all come crystal clear, like you said earlier. You know, you get to the end of the window, they maybe do some business and maybe all the pieces of the puzzle will fit into place. But Hibs, I'm not too sure how to read them. You feel quite good for top six. I'm on the fence.
I'm going to say will depend on their business. One thing I will say, Nathan Lowe's on loan, so even if he does well, he's going back
Oh,
to Stoke. So
of course.
he's one again. You look at a transfer like that and you go, there's one of the players that potentially has a high ceiling, and he's not even your player. So in that respect, does that move make a lot of sense? Maybe not. I'm actually going to say they can go as high as 5th, but I feel like they could go as low as 10th. I feel like Hibs are very much capable of that. I think there's a couple of teams in the league who will be almost a safeguard at the bottom who I'm sure we'll come on to. I think they will be above them, but I think if Hibs do underperform, if they maybe do get through in Europe, if they sneak through, I believe they've got a fairly favourable tie after Malasheva if they can get through. If they do have to balance two different competitions, perhaps, plus the growing expectation of the Hibs fans, you never know. A couple of bad results could turn into a bit of a slide. So it's a bit safe, but I'm going to say somewhere between 5 and 10th. I really don't see them challenging for anything higher than 5th. I just don't think, as it stands, they have the squad depth or the quality to go and do that.
And when you say there about reminding me about Nathan Lowe being on loan from Stoke and having a good upside on a player that they're not actually going to make bank from, the team that made that mistake last year in the division was Dundee. You know, Stephen Presley came in and really did a good job on developing some players. I was reading quotes this morning. Luke Graham has made his debut for Stoke, and already Stoke fans are saying Luke Graham's going to be player of the year. They love him. He's hit the ground running in a big way. And GG's to Dundee for all that. But they went into the market this year and they've been buying more guys. I think there is a loan or two in there, but in the main, they've went for permanent transfers over loans and whatnot. And the squad now is, I would say, it looks like a similar level to last year. You know, they've added a wee bit of maybe league experience in the likes of an Alan Forrest and whatnot. Donnelly's actually just went on loan today to Dunfermline. I'm pretty sure, isn't it?
It
Yeah.
has indeed.
To hang out with countryman Neil Lennon, get some development and whatnot. And they've got the goalkeeper in now as well, Goodman, since I've been away, so I'll let him in. But I think that Dundee, it's a lean and mean squad, and now they own the majority of the ceiling talents, you know, the guys with upside. I think Dundee, well, I mentioned before, I think Aberdeen could maybe be like the Motherwell of the equation or whatever. I could see Dundee quite easily being that Falkirk type team that's like on the lower budget, really pushing the top end of not the top end of the table, you know, but the upper section. With less than everyone else, kinda.
I will give my opinion because it actually differs from yours, but I'd love to hear why you think so. The reason I'm
Cool.
saying Dundee, you're saying the squad looks similar to last season. I would strongly disagree. So Luke Graham and Billy Kumetio, the centre back pairing, both gone.
Yeah.
Obviously, they've just lost Donnelly to Dunfermline, as you said. They have lost a bit of experience across the back line, albeit maybe not players like Paul Digby, Clark Robertson, you know, experience, but not necessarily starters. They've lost their number 1, John McCracken, so he's obviously moved on. They've lost their number 2, well, not their number 2, but they've lost Trevor Carson, older head. Harry Sharp, someone who has been around Dundee a long time, had a bit of a shocker in the cup. So really, you're looking at Goodman and O'Hara there as your 2 options. But I guess more importantly is your Gannon Congreve, who, if you watched Dundee last season, especially Cameron Congreve, he was a massive shining light. Tony O'Gan, obviously, great 1v1 ability on that side, maybe lacked the end product, but Cam Congreve, in terms of delivery and what he offered creatively, was a huge outlay for Dundee. When you look at who they brought in, Alan Forrest, obviously, yes, a solid signing on that side. Zambazir, who's been kind of talked up a little bit, you know, midfielder from, I believe, Slovenia. Yes, from Slovenia. Odutayo, young sort of left back from Bromley, but coming on a free. And then a couple of people who you can see a bit of influence from Stephen Presley. Owen Bevan previously had a spell at Hibs, didn't quite work out, but looks pretty good. Ryan Finnegan coming and played a decent amount of minutes from Blackpool. And then Owen Goodman, young keeper, on loan from Crystal Palace. So in terms of what they've lost and what they've gained, I think they've lost a lot of league experience and they've brought in a lot of unproven talent. Now, the good thing about unproven talent is they have such an unknown ceiling that they could go on to be brilliant. However, I don't share the same confidence that I could hang my hat on the fact that I actually have them being in the bottom two for me as it stands. Now, I think they've got a lot of business to do. Um, I think Donnelly was only leaving on the assumption that they were bringing a centre back in, so I expect that to probably be announced today after we've recorded. I think they still need quite a bit across the board. Up front, they're maybe okay. Joe Bevan on the right looks like a decent prospect. Quite funny seeing him and Charlie Riley both at Albion Rovers a couple of years ago. So clearly there's talent down in League Two level. And Charlie Riley's one who has been so unlucky with injury. He was an outstanding talent at Albion Rovers, made the step up 3 leagues essentially. Thought he was going to kick on. I think maybe Dundee came back down. He was maybe there. I could be wrong. But assumed he was going to kick on, had injury problems, went and had a loan in the Championship, done fairly well. I think he was at Arbroath. And he's came back and he's done really, really well in the League Cup group stage. He's only 24 still, so someone who has a lot of talent. Joe Westley has goals in him. Ashley Hay, I believe, speaking to some Dundee fans, he's someone that has brought a lot more than what he had last season, a lot of energy up there. And Finn Robertson, someone who's been around Dundee all his career, always been tipped for big things. I think he made his debut at 16. James McPake brought him through. He's almost developed from like a deep six to someone who can actually influence the game a little bit higher up the pitch. So he could certainly be one that I would keep an eye on. Obviously, the big one being Hamilton in the midfield. He had some outstanding games last season. And I think they'll be looking to him as a bit of a linchpin in there. But outside of that, that defence needs a bit of work. And I think the goalkeepers, I'm not 100% sure that this was a season to go for a young, untested goalkeeper on loan.
Yeah, no, fair enough. I've maybe got a wee bit. Congreve, I would agree, has not been replaced. I would definitely go along with that. And
don't let me influence you. By the way,
no.
I'd love to hear why you think otherwise. That would be great.
I think there.
I might be totally wrong.
No. The Zanbasir guy, I've got a bit of high hopes for, having watched a highlight package or two, right? Which I think everyone can be guilty of at times. So happy to be wrong on that. But the boy, Bevan, Finnegan, and the other moves that they've made, I'm very much the one that will say, like, no two footballers are the same, and you can't be judging them all as the same in that sense, right? But I don't think they're of a totally different caliber to the Congreves and these other guys that they brought in last year. Obviously, they need to go improve it, they need to go and step up and whatever. Congreve is the one that I maintain probably still needs replaced. And Luke Graham is a big missing defender in there, as well as the other boy that they let go. But I think I like Ryan Astley. I think he's decent. I know he's not perfect or whatever. I think Bevan's got the kind of minerals where somebody like Presley could bring the best out of him. And I don't know. I think lean squads, and I was talking about Kilmarnock not having any defensive depth. Dundee still definitely need to arrest that a little bit and get that up and going. But once they've got like another defender or two in here to plug some gaps, like a lean squad that Stephen Presley's clearly shown he can get, and it didn't start off great for him last year. I accept that, right? But he's clearly shown that he's able of getting the team on the same page, and he's able of getting more out of some individuals when they're young and encourageable and teachable and such. It may be that I think they'll be like a total sum of the parts value rather than the sum of the individual. They probably still need a wee bit of X factor in the team because, like you say, Congreve and whatnot are definitely big misses that were very impressive last year. But I think there's just more confidence about the project. Let's say when Presley came in, you'll remember last year they get pumped in the League Cup, and Stephen Presley was in the press conferences saying, "If you've ever looked at my track record, I don't do well in the cups. So, like, what are you moaning about? Like, this is what you get when you hire Stephen Presley, is you get knocked out of the cup." Like, which is a bit tongue in cheek, and I think Dundee fans have kind of warmed to that patter over the last season. So I think I'm just maybe drinking some of the Elvis tea. Maybe there's a wee bit of that going on where I think he's got a plan, and he's the architect of the team. So I maybe back him maybe a bit more than like, oh, this guy is going to be the one that brings it together, if that makes sense. But you're right to check me on it, because I'm maybe getting a wee bit carried away with some of the lack of, I say, Congreve still needs done, and maybe one or two others in defence.
He's easy to like, Stephen Presley, in terms of the way he talks about it. I think he said not bad for a jobby team at one point last season, which was very funny.
Yeah.
And I guess just to contradict myself, I just wanted to have a little look at their signings last year. As soon as I went on the outs, the first one's Josh Mulligan for nothing, Jordan McGee to Motherwell for nothing, Scott Tiffany to Kilmarnock for nothing. Joe Shaughnessy, who I believe was the captain, left. Mo Silla, who was a dependent midfielder, left for nothing. Lyle Cameron left. And I believe Portales, he played a lot of games at centre-back, he left as well. Larkesh, who was our starting left-back, he left. Or he maybe left at the... No, he did leave, actually. He went back to QPR. So there you go. It doesn't necessarily mean all doom and gloom. It's just, of course, can they go and replicate again in the market? We'll have to wait and see. One other positive as well I want to touch on. Cam Congreve was signed on the 22nd of August last year.
Yep.
So that was one that was done late in the window, and one that always had a massive impact. Jan Danda, I think, came in kind of late-ish as well. And then again, looking at some of the other signings, so like Joe Bevan came from Burnley 21s, Joe Wesley from Burnley 21s, Emil Aqua went to Barrow and then has since left, I believe. Ethan Hamilton from Lincoln, Ashley Hay from Brentford B, a couple of pickups for Brentford B, lower leagues, etc., etc. So Stephen Presley knows that market really well. And one of the things that these teams, especially from me watching them, B team football is so far from first team football in terms of how it looks and how it operates. There's players at B team level and it's so orchestrated and it's so about shape and it's extremely safe. They don't want people injured. They want them managing minutes. All this kind of stuff. It doesn't look like real football. And I think Stephen Presley knows that, having been with the Brentford setup for so long. So he gives these players an opportunity to go and show what they can do at first team level. And he's shown that they've actually got a fairly solid platform. They get people minutes and they get them moves. So I would not be surprised if Elvis pulls his magic, brings in a couple of deals from down south towards the end of the window. I guess the one issue is, how long can you keep taking untested talent before you have one window that doesn't go so right? The one that always sticks in my head is Leicester, where Leicester obviously had lots of years in the Prem. They couldn't quite get that top 2 or 3 finish. They just fell outside the Champions League places over and over. And they kept gambling on squad turnover. They would have a crop of players that they could go and sell, and then they'd go and reinvest straight away in the playing squad. And then one summer it all came crashing down. Obviously, they nearly got relegated, and then they eventually were relegated. They had the pressures of all this. Theirs is different because obviously it was wage structure related, but it's the same idea. They were constantly reliant on having a new crop of players to go and sell. Dundee's is very much, they're reliant on having a crop of players to get going straight away to keep them in that league. How long can they do it for? Maybe another season. We shall see.
So you've got them, you reckon they're bottom, let's just say bottom 3, bottom 4?
I've got them in around that bottom 3, but of course there's still a month of the window left. If they make some key signings, I think along that back line, if they could bring in, like I said, someone of like a Jan Danda's quality, who obviously he has quality on the pitch plus set piece threat. And I think midfield looks a little bit light. Obviously Hamilton makes up one. Finnegan I'd like to see a little bit more of, but it seems to have taken all the minutes. They could maybe add one more sort of destroyer type in there, someone who can go and break up play. Once you add that in with the number 10s who have a bit of quality, Robertson, Bashir, I think they've got enough up front. Then we can maybe be looking at sort of challenging that upper echelons, but I still think they'll be a bottom half team, in my opinion.
I've got them as an outsider. I fancy them for like a wee 5th or 6th. I could see them doing a wee Falkirk, personally. So we'll see how it goes. I love that we've had a wee difference of opinion on one there, which is good.
I was going to say one more thing.
Yeah.
From the League Cup, review, Charlie Usenbrough made his debut as well, age 17. Signed a new contract with a hell of a lot of fanfare. So we were talking about fixing out the defence. He is dual national again. There seem to be quite a few of these dual nationals coming through in the League Cup stages and maybe through Scotland in general. These are the type of players who you want to see flourish early, especially in those positions. Centre-back for the national team and for Dundee would be massive. I don't think the Netherlands are going to necessarily call on him, but you never know. And he seems to have a lot of hype behind him. So if he could get the season off and running, there's no reason they can't go and do Luke Graham Mark II and go and spin him into a really, really key player.
Good catch on that. And when you talk about like being reliant on having another crop of players to sell, I think every Scottish football fan, that what pings on their radar is probably the whole Tony Bloom project that we've got over in Edinburgh with Hearts. We mentioned it earlier, of course, they've lost a lot of big players early in the window, similar to Dundee, as you read out their tail of the tape from the window previous. For nothing, Shankland left for some crazy clause in his contract that had been worked out or something. I'm not really too sure the details of that even still. Devlin obviously eventually protracted free agent throughout this World Cup stint before the manager leaves. And I've got the graphics set up for it. Should be quite visually telling as I hope it is. But this is, we're missing Shankland and Devlin. I think, are they probably removed now? Yeah, they are. Let me just add them on real quick for effect. Right, but this is essentially the team they had last year. It's like a whole new team. So a few big departures, a few big wages, of course, but they've not been shy, they've not been slow, Hearts. They've firmly went back into the market and recreated Shankland in the aggregate, is I think the expression from the Moneyball movie. We can recreate him in the aggregate. So Bassey, Gwendouz, even James Wilson is coming back into the mix here. Calvin Miller, who we mentioned previously. There's been a real, it feels like a real USGification of Hearts over this window, where they've really, like, with McInnes and whatnot leaving, they've maybe went, right, screw it. Let's just get to stage 3 of the plan that we were planning on doing. Let's just jump a step. We finished second. These guys have moved on. Let's kick it into gear. I've been really impressed with how active and how effective they've been in the window so quickly, so early. I think they had a good plan for trying to get ready for the qualifiers with everything. But I think we mentioned it earlier, I'll mention it again. It cannot be underestimated how hard it is to replace people when they're key parts of the personality of the changing room and whatnot when they leave. And at this moment in time, I was like, Hearts, Sturmgratz, and I get it, right? Fine. But I don't think, I personally, I don't think that's going to be a sign of what's to come for Hearts. Like losing a Champions League qualifier, they've got Benfica most likely in the Europa League qualifier. Losing matches like that, I don't think is a real barometer, is a real yardstick on where the Hearts project is. But I think it does bring Hearts fans maybe back to reality of it's not just going to be an upward trend. There is going to be some potholes and even some growing pains probably this year about the project in general that they've got going on. Lots of different shapes and sizes of players, all from all corners of the world, from Scotland to French League 3 to back in Slovenia or wherever these guys have been. I think Hearts are firmly top 3. I think there's going to be a lot of conversation from some fans that maybe think that based on Sturmgratz or whatever, that might not quite be the case. But how do you feel about Hearts coming into the year, Hendo?
In terms of where they're going to finish, I tend to agree, and the reason being, we've spoke about this a little bit off camera, in terms of what, like you said, the USGification of Hearts. It's very much what it is. Hearts are in this kind of value creation phase of the project where they want to close the gap before they can have a proper go. Hearts fans, and I think Scottish football fans, and obviously it captured the imagination of a lot of football fans across the world, will now have this expectation that Hearts can go and split the Old Firm every year. In reality, again, even looking at the points totals from last season, I think were Celtic 82 points, is that right?
Yeah.
80 or 82 points. They were saying across the last sort of decade, I was reading the article on BBC, you needed about 91.55 points, I think, on average to go and win the league. So it was a down year in terms of what they had there. You had circumstances where Celtic and Rangers had spells in the season of 8 games roughly, where they've basically put a dent in their own season, and Hearts still didn't quite manage to get the job over the line. Now, did it mean that they had a bad season? No, they had an outstanding season. But I think Hearts fans need to see it as we are now in the stage of anything over the next, say, 5 to 10 years is a bonus. But by the time those 5 to 10 years are up, we will have a squad value, enough money in the bank, a player trading model built on the years that have gone previously, that we are now a lot closer, we're a closer footing to Celtic and Rangers, minus the commercial income and I guess the world commercial income, because obviously Rangers and Celtic, 2 massive global clubs. So that's what Hearts need to see. But look at it in the short term, so just like some of the outs, obviously, first of all, I think as much as on the pitch, and let's just see it in 2 chains of thought. Have they sold or have they let anybody go who has a massive value or would have been sold for a massive amount of money? I think specifically Rangers would have paid a lot of money for Lon Shankland, but I'm not actually sure a lot of other teams would have. So I'm not necessarily convinced that that's a huge loss for their model. Cammy Devlin's one that, like you said, he's valued at 2 million on Transfermarkt there. They might have been able to sell him for about that, but in the grand scheme of things, I don't think they'll be that worried because of the service that they've got out of him. They've managed to squeeze a lot out of someone who cost them effectively nothing anyway, so I wouldn't be too bothered about that. And outside of that, they got a little bit of money back for Chesnikov, who I think they got for free, and then moved on. I think they waited till January so that they could get him on a pre-contract. They moved them on for 400k, or 400,000 euros. And outside of that, nobody else has got any kind of significant value. Macaulay Tate, I think he was an undisclosed fee to St Johnstone. again, a prospect who's not going to get near the club. Schwoloff has a fairly high value, but just because of his pedigree previously, but he's never going to get sold for money. Steinvender, I think they got about 1.5 million for, over and above his value. Someone who I personally didn't rate particularly highly, but I think he was in there for his height and his physicality. And outside of that, there's nobody else who's really moved out on permanent deals. I think maybe one, and this is just a pure injury point of view, is Benny Beningame, who anytime you watched him, he looked really solid, really good player. I think they've probably just seen it as they've got probably 10 Benny Beningames across Europe that, one, they can go and develop and get a fee for, and two, have got a less patchy injury record. So it's just one of them where you've got to say, it's a really tough one to let you go, but we're going to let you go. And then on the incomings, it's hard to tell, because again, at this stage, and one of the things that USG like to do is pick up these players who maybe you get them for nothing, and if you only sell them for 400, 500k, that's okay. If you can get a turn out of them for maybe a season, 2 seasons, sometimes you get people like Dante Van Zier, for example, that they had and then sold on for a lot of money. Someone like Dennis Undav, who, yes, they paid a lot of money, but they got money back. Or Teddy Tuma, for example. Like all these players who they pick up for very little or nothing, and they go on to sell for a little bit more. It's just incrementally moving it along. It's almost like the idea of like compound interest. That's what Hearts look like as a club. Can we get a bunch of players together, get something on the pitch that looks like good football and something that attracts other teams to come and get them? So that's what this season is. And if you break it down, so yes, Calvin Miller's one that's coming in at a PK. He's just going to be one that they're going to get the service out of rather than the sell on. But 28, they're going to get a good few years out of him. MJ Camson Kamara, not been seen a lot, but again, free transfer from Lincoln, pretty low risk. One I think I'm a bit disappointed, but Josh McPake going there and then getting bombed out of the European squad already. Definitely one I could see maybe getting picked up on loan by another Scottish team, because you've got to remember he was playing Championship football last season. He was playing League Two football with Stirling Albion the season before that, and he was on his way out of probably falling out of football at that point. So a loan to another Premiership club is still a step up for him, and probably one that they can maybe still see at 24 years of age has development. Rogers Mato, they were going to pay the best part of $1 million for it, ended up getting him for nothing. So again, another one who holds value. Bo Royce has come in, goalkeeper, valued at about 1.5 million, massive goalkeeper. Again, good age profile. Had a good season with Beveren by all accounts. Stu Finlay, I think he was maybe arranged to come in after his loan anyway. And then Bassi, like you say, 200k. Mendy's come in for what could be up to $1 million if the add-ons are there. Gwen Dews, about $1 million. And Fagan Walcott, who is quite nice. I got to see a lot of him at Dunfermline. James McPake brought him in on loan because he had him previously at Dundee. He had a really bad injury. I think any club he signs for, they're going to note the fact he's played 1 minute of Champions League football for Tottenham. Got subbed on. It just seems to follow him around with Champions League pedigree. But yeah, he played 1 minute. But they paid over $1 million for him from York in the National League, and they went to the National League for Mendy as well. So just interesting to see that they've picked these players up over a certain level. It doesn't really matter where they've came from, second, third divisions, National League, whatever it might be. They're just trying to find a coherent blend. And at the moment, I think that's what they're missing. If you watched the games against Sturm Graz, they're missing the blend that they had from last season. McInnes had them in a really nice balance, and he signed players who, like he's done at Rangers, fit his mould. We don't know a lot about Wouter Franken because he's come in with a very good reputation, but we don't know a hell of a lot about the type of style of player he wants to play. Hearts just haven't played a lot of football yet. So I think over the next month will be really telling. And I don't think Hearts are really in a position. I know they've kind of done it with Neil Critchley where they brought him in and then got rid of him. I think with Wouter Franken's pedigree and where they are on their kind of life cycle of Jamestown, I think there's a good chance he sees out the most part of the season. And I think he's going to be long-term a success. And I really don't think Hearts are done in the market either. As much as they do have quite a big squad, definitely feels like there's room for more.
I think so too. Braga's made some good noises about staying, which despite the interest, and like you said, that just the way these teams normally work, like if Braga's getting a big bid, these teams normally don't blink about selling. Like it doesn't matter how important they are, everyone has their price, and we'll just roll on and go back to the market. So I would be surprised, especially now they're not going to qualify for the Champions League. I would be very surprised if Braga was to hang around, and if he does go, it will be a record fee received for Hearts, probably, you would imagine. Maybe not certainly, but it's got to be up there with the Craig Gordon kind of numbers. And Kizaridis has kind of been in and out the rumour mill. So between the two of them, like if they were to go, I think you could see another kind of injection of capital. And then, like you say, maybe some of those late window signings when they know what competition they're in. The manager's got a better idea of, I don't like this guy, I can use him. McPake will put him out on loan. There's even been some discussion I've seen about how the new manager's using Calvin Miller, and how he maybe needs to revisit that kind of element of it all. But I just don't see Hearts being. I don't see them dropping off a cliff. I think they're a big part of their success last year was their home record. And I don't think there's going to be many seats at Tynecastle that are empty this year. I think their home support, their home record will still kind of hold up this year. Are they kind of split in Glasgow and are they getting in a title race? I don't really see that myself. I think that last year they played the group stage of the League Cup and then one knockout game. They played one knockout game in the Scottish Cup. So what are we talking about there? 5 matches. They played that plus the league. They played 43 games last year. If they get into the group stage of the Conference League, or if this Woodward ranking guy wants to go and get a cup, they're going to play a lot more games than that this year. So they are going to need to bob and weave and kind of cycle through the year. But I don't think anyone's going to dethrone them in that kind of third spot. Maybe they'll be close to the top 2, don't get me wrong, but I just don't think it's going to be the same as last year where they're in the chase as much, personally.
And I agree. I think there'll be a comfortable third. Like I said, I don't know if it'll be the fastest start to the season. Just looking at your squad graphic there. So, I mean, Aguiu has been obviously the big disappointment from the Jamestown picking up. They've heard he's been great in training. I think he started 1 game last season, £2 million. One of the club record signings, I think. He's just not kicked a ball at all. So he could be like a new signing, but I think they'll find the blend in there. I think Tom Renault is a really smart pickup from Versailles. I think he'll go in there and be a starting midfielder. I'm surprised not to see more of Magnuson because before his injury, he looked really good last season.
Yeah.
I think the defence needs a little bit of surgery. So that left-hand side is obviously a little bit ageing. Harry Milner had a good season last year, has plenty of energy, but I can see maybe Stephen Kingsley being replaced or Stephen Kingsley being used in that McCart role on the left-hand side of the defence. Jamie McCart maybe being moved on. I can see Jan Danda being moved on. I think Blair Spitt was a really good player, but I think he's going to get lost in the shuffle. And again, he might be more useful to another team in Scotland, perhaps. And someone like, I think Kabore, they've tried him. It's not really worked. Kabangu, I think, is definitely on his way out. They just need to find a suitor for him. I think there's a position there to almost, if they find the right blend of play or the right type of player, someone to play up with Braga. Maybe not with him, but maybe just playing off him, more in that kind of 4-2-3-1 type of shape. If they can find that type of player, I would expect Hearts to move pretty quickly. That's where I think they're maybe lacking a superstar signing, and that could be one that just pushes them over the edge. But I think they'll be a comfortable third.
Yeah, agreed. The last thing I'll kind of say on it as well is like they've bought a lot of these guys in, Gwendou's, Bassi, and there'll be more to come, as we've mentioned. Hearts don't need all of them to work. They're playing a game of 1 or 2 of them work. They'll do pretty well. The Tom Renaud guy looks the part. He looks very much like a Eddie Puma, kind of a Mark II kind of player. So, like, I think they've shown already with their success. I think they'll get enough of them turning around to be a success. But again, I don't think anyone or Hearts fans can expect that every signing is going to be worthwhile or really hit the ground running. So it will be a case of who does and how well do they perform, I think. But overall, I think Hearts are really good for it. My camera 1 is melted, so I'm on camera 2 as we get through the back end of this SPFL preview. We've kind of went through the main runners and riders. I don't think there's really much left to go through. I think we've got 3 or 4 teams left, so thanks to everyone that's still watching. I really appreciate you all being here for it. St Mirren was one of the teams that you had mentioned, Hendo, that you managed to get a good eye across of action. I was kind of saying to one of the live streams we did on the channel, I don't get where the kind of, I don't want to say hype, but St Mirren have got a lot of confidence in the manager. Feels like maybe St Mirren fans have got a lot of confidence in the manager. Maybe I need to do some homework on the guy or something. I don't know. But St Mirren, how do you feel about them? How do you look at Craig McLeish and what do you think they're capable of?
Yeah, so I seen the full 90 against Dunfermline. I stayed up to watch the game. The first 45, they looked really comfortable in possession. They obviously have a completely chalk and cheese from last season. Stephen Robinson playing very direct and having a lot of success. And I think that's maybe why they've decided to stick with Craig McLeish, someone who they clearly think can coach a certain style. And I think the early evidence is that he clearly can. The falling down with that style is they had nothing really in the final third to suggest, other than you may argue that they should have had the goal that was chopped off, possibly, but it was given as a foul on the keeper. But other than that, they didn't really create a lot of clear-cut chances. They weren't getting the ball into dangerous areas often enough, and they didn't seem like they had that focal point. Last season, it was very clear. You would have like Mikael Mandron, Jonah Ayunga, obviously Olasanya before that. they very clearly had like strikers who would maybe score like between 7 and 12 goals a season. They had a couple of them, and they put them in there, and that's all they really needed because they were nice and defensively solid. So I would agree he's probably a very good coach, and he's got his point across well. But without that top end of the pitch, it then just kind of all falls away and it kind of dies over whimper type of thing. In second half, Dunfermline were really aggressive and took the game to St Mirren, and they really folded quite badly under pressure. The midfield, for example, Fraser Taylor, very small, very diminutive, picked up some great positions in the first half, and the game was flowing through him. But a lot of these passes weren't necessarily breaking lines and being killer balls or anything. He was very much the link between the midfield. I thought Ryan Carr looked pretty decent in that first half. He was able to use the ball quite well. He's another one of the new signings. Chris Mockery, I've seen a lot of Dunfermline, very elusive dribbler, but one of his main issues was end quality. He just didn't have enough end product. When he got into good positions, he's not a particularly clinical finisher. He's weirdly kind of both-footed but no-footed at the same time. He looks quite comfortable on both but not adept with either. And then they've obviously brought in Asosa Sula, who is a really interesting sign, a big powerhouse striker, but technical as well. He looks a good player, but do they have enough up there? I think that's the issue that they're going to face. Last season, obviously, they had a very clear idea of get the ball into the box, like Scott Tanzer, lots of crosses, set pieces, but he's moved on. And Lundaloo, that was one of the other strikers. He wasn't amazing, but he scored a couple of goals. I think he scored maybe in either the cup final or the cup semi.
Mandron too.
And obviously, I don't know if Mandron moved on, but he's not on the list of outs. But
he's away to like Rotherham or Plymouth or something like that. Or
I thought that because I seem to remember seeing him. I think he was in the PFA team or something like that. Mark O'Hara, we spoke about earlier, has moved on, club captain, a lot of experience. Miguel Freckleton, moved on to LASK in Austria. Interesting move for him. But again, someone at a good age that they've lost out that back three, which I don't expect them to play anyway. But then you look at who they actually do have in there. So you've got Richard King in, but Gogic played, and I can't actually remember who else played centre half. But I was thinking that doesn't. Oh, sorry, Marcus Fraser actually played as the right centre half, and Jaden Richardson played as the right back. Now, for me, Jaden Richardson is an out-and-out right wing back, someone who I just don't think is a right back at all. Marcus Fraser looked really leggy in there, looked like a guy who does have a lot of minutes on the clock. Alex Gogic looked excellent. Funnily enough, he can play with the ball, but he's just so solid. And Henry Fieldson did play on the left, new signing, but Declan John's been pretty solid out there. Across the front line, obviously you've got Ramos as a bit of a marquee signing. He's looked pretty decent. They brought in Paul Ensio, who had a good loan spell at Wraith Rovers. He can play in that central area and out wide. Again, if Young's still there, Young as well, Jake Young, I don't know if he's maybe subject to going back down south pretty quickly. And Roland Adowu came on. Adowu, Dykesteel, again, these are players that they've been around a little bit, but you haven't seen a lot of. And this style of play, if you think about Stephen Robinson, direct, big target men, playing for first and seconds, to me, that is what Killian Phillips is good at. He's one of those players, he's good in that number 10 role. He can get a goal, full of passion, physical. He likes to get on the opponent's nerves, that type of thing.
Yeah.
I don't know if this... And by the way, I'm saying all this because I think we can all agree Killian Phillips one of their better players last season. Someone who clearly has value and could be valuable to a number of teams in the league. I just don't think this style of play is going to suit someone like him. And when you start isolating some of your better players into systems that they can't adapt to, then I think you've got a big problem. And one other thing that I've seen, the goalkeeper Chapman, who's come in extremely good with his feet. He was clipping balls left and right. He was fantastic with his feet. He certainly didn't look the most fluent making saves, and I can say for sure Erminski and Mullen are not really adequate backup. So if you're hanging your hat on Chapman, who I'm not necessarily sure I would be, he's very much a stylistic goalkeeper. So if they get off to a bad start, they end up getting rid of Craig McLeish, then they simply do not have a keeper who can flip the switch and just simply keep the ball at the back of the net.
Interesting you say that, because I've actually been really impressed with St Mirren's goalkeeper loans over the last couple of years. Like, what's the guy's name? Is it Zion Hemming or something? Or I can't remember the guy's name now. Zach Hemming maybe or something?
Zach Hemming, yeah.
Yeah, and then Ellery Balcombe, I'm really impressed with him a year or two ago as well. So when you said this guy was good with his feet, I thought you were going to go on to say this guy's maybe a bit of a total package, but no, he's maybe a bit 1D, a bit one-dimensional perhaps. But interesting to hear you say that about Chapman.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, like you said, so the style of play with St Mirren, I think it'll be quite impressive until it's not.
Or-
Until they realise that, to me, it didn't look like what Motherwell were trying to do. It looked like he has an idea in his head. He's able to get it across them, but does that translate then into, let's just call it like high XG chances, for example? I don't really think so. And I think unless they can make some signings across that top area, which, as you can see, is quite crowded. There's a lot of names up there, but is there a
Mhm.
lot of quality? Until they do that, I'm unconvinced that they're going to really make any traction in the league.
Yeah, I think with St Mirren, like, I think Killian Phillips is widely rumoured to be going to MLS quite soon as well. Pace. I think he's the best player in the squad individual wise in terms of like squad value and a lot of the chat we've had on the show today. So I rate him quite highly. I think he would be a big loss. I kind of yeah, I do struggle to see where they improve on last year. Are they going to win another cup this year? You'd have to say unlikely. And I know the league performance last year was dreadful, and they had a real cup hangover situation early start of the year. They never really recovered from. But again, like when you look at the competition in the league, like there's not many teams I look at and think, oh yes, St Mirren will be better than them. If anything, like you were like, oh, I've got Dundee for like kind of the bottom two. I've kind of got St Mirren in that kind of mold for me. Where like I can't put St Mirren above that many teams. I like Gogic is cool, and some of these other guys could be fine. Sula and Ayunga if he's still around and whatever. But I just look around the squad, the league, and I don't see many teams that St Mirren I think are better than. Was where I kind of struggle with them really. So I think it'll be a tough year, to be honest with you, for them. Still long to go in the window. Maybe some more business will be done. Because an understated thing as well, by the way, but early, one of the first videos we had on this channel, we were reporting on how St Mirren had hired the Motherwell like head of football or something like that, who's I think credited with a good part of Motherwell's mini transformation they've had in recent times. That
Mm.
boy you mentioned, Sula, is a former Celtic kid, but he went to Motherwell last year and then it injured and stuff. It never really worked out. So for them to maybe for now St Mirren, now they've got this new head of football guy in. I think they're trying to do a bit of the Motherwells. I found it interesting that you even referenced Motherwell in the comparison when you were talking on them. So I'm up for being surprised. It's kind of where I'm getting to with that. But yeah, from a distance or from arm's length right now, I'm not sure they've got enough. I'm not sure. I'm not sure they're better than many teams. Really, is what it comes down to.
Agreed. And I think, to be fair, the good thing is they've got like a wild card on Samuel Ramos. He was dropping it like really deep areas on the right hand side and pinging left footed passes really impressively to get him behind. But I actually think we will see him in that number 10 that you've got him in there. He could be a wild card package. Someone who I believe he came from the same team as Alexandros Kazaridis from last season,
Yep.
also came on a free. So I'm not really sure what their parent club is doing in the transfer market. They're probably not one to emulate, but he could be one that if he actually kicks on, he could have. I'm just trying to think of like people of yesterday. I think they had like Andy Dorman, for example, just one of these like stalwart players who scored plenty of goals. Even someone like, I don't know, like Rudy Scaccio came to the league and just became a bit of a
Yeah, yeah.
hallmark player for a team. He could kind of carry the team on his back a little bit, but it's a lot of pressure for a guy that's never played in the league. Exciting one. He's one out of that team that I go, that's an exciting one that I really want to see how he does this season.
Likewise. Uh, I didn't. Yeah. Sorry. I was going to say I didn't want to finish on Celtic, but I'll just leave that to when we get there.
Oh, you
I'll
got
go to
St.
St
St
Johnson.
Johnson and Celtic, aye.
St Johnson. And I think for most Scottish football fans, when it comes to like who could be doubt, this is a conversation I really enjoyed having with the live chat right before I took a few days off. Is who do you think will finish bottom? I think it's a really tough thing to predict coming into this season because I don't think there's that many teams that are clearly worse than everyone else. It depends how you look at it. I think by default, a lot of people are saying St Johnson because they're newly promoted, they're coming from the division below. I really like that Valakari when they got relegated and they've come back. We'll have a look at the squad and the business and whatnot, but I think you'd be a bit foolish to just automatically assume that St Johnson are going to be like bottom. I'm not saying they're going to be far from it or they're not going to be necessarily. Let's see how it goes. But I don't think St Johnson are, again, clearly the worst team in the league right now as it sits. I think the manager, they've got a good kind of unit and whatnot, some good experience in the likes of Jason Holt and one or two others have made some good moves in this window. St Johnson's a team you've seen a lot more of, obviously, from last year coming into this one. So, how do you feel about St Johnson yourself?
I think they won the league at a canter last season, but they had a very clear strategy in the market. So they wanted to get the best in the championship. Now, the good thing about that is you get tried and tested players at championship level, players who can come in and make an impact straight away, and almost guarantee you a floor of top four in that league. but they were looking to come straight back up, which is great. The problem it gives you on the other side is when you do get up, you now have a squad of Championship players under contract who are maybe a little bit more difficult to move on. Now, they've done a decent job. They got rid of like Svedberg, who I think they had previously anyway. They had Sprangler, who they've also let go, kind of older. Regan Tumulty, Stevie Mallon. These were people I think that were on 1-year contracts, just basically trying to tide them over. They have lost Franjak, which is a bit interesting. Come through their youth academy, Polish player, like Polish Scottish. He has went to, I believe, the Polish league. Bit of a weird one that they couldn't just fit him in and find him game time. And they were the same with the Max Kucherevi a couple of years ago. Couldn't quite fit him into a team, even though he looked pretty promising. But of course, they do have a Josh McPake-sized hole in the squad. He was so influential, especially in the first half of last season. He was absolutely on fire. And it would be interesting if he has been bombed from the squad. Maybe they could get him back on loan. And I think that would solve a lot of problems. But in the absence of him, they have went out and made some decent signings. So Logan Chalmers was one that I'd spoke about for a long time of being far too good for the Championship. His just general quality on the ball is absolutely outstanding. He's able to carry the ball. He's got a really sweet left foot, decent strike, good delivery, good work rate as well. He's a hard worker. He can play centrally. He can play out wide. I remember him playing for Ayr and thinking this guy's going to be a real success in the league above. And as soon as he made that sideways step, I thought that was really, really weird. So 26 years old, finally getting his chance. Really excited about that one. That again, Rudy Payton, proven Championship goal scorer. Didn't really do it with Dundee United, but was a bit of a marquee signing when he went to Dundee United. They beat a lot of people to his signature. Seems to have settled in a lot more at St Johnstone, so he might be able to do the business. One who obviously I want to do well is Matthew Todd, who I think you've got in centre mid there, but he certainly played most of his football at right wing back last season. Obviously, a lot of games for Dunfermline. His engine is just incredible. He's able to get up and down the pitch like barely any other player. He maybe lacks a little bit in the technicals, but he can also pop up late into the box and certainly has plenty of goals under his belt for Dunfermline. However, never played a single game of Premiership football, so there is that kind of contend with. And other ones on the good signing. So Toby Stewart last season, or Stewart rather, he was really good, outstanding keeper. I think he had the most clean sheets across the 4 Scottish leagues. Standing game against Dunfermline as well, really, really good, to the point where I think I might have mentioned him to Cambridge because I think he was on loan from Portsmouth. And he's back on loan again. So 21 years old, clearly someone that Portsmouth see as having a future, and clearly someone they see as being settled at St Johnstone. So I think he could be a big difference maker. They brought in Macaulay Tate, as we mentioned before. And one that you have not seen yet, but there was a lot of fanfare about, Unax Alvarez on the right wing, or the left wing, I guess, from Guadalajara. Someone that, again, comes with a bit of X factor, and certainly one that looks good for the statos on Twitter. But he's carrying a ligament knock, I believe, so that's kept him out of the League Cup games, and maybe that's to their detriment. They only managed 7 points. They played Falkirk's fairly settled 4-2-3-1 shape. I mean, in context, so they lost 1-0 on a Tuesday night away to Inverness. I believe Inverness are unbeaten in like 24 games or something like that. Now, it's not an excuse because they've came up from League One to the Championship, but if you've ever been to Inverness on a Tuesday night, you'll understand how horrible it is to play football up there. And I believe they drew in the Alloa game and then maybe lost on penalties, and that was due to, I think it was Diabate letting the ball run across his body. A big mistake from someone who was really solid last season. But then when I start looking at it, I'm like, he was solid, but at Championship level, yes, they brought in Zach Mitchell on loan, who I think done pretty well at Hibs and then went back due to injury or something like that. So they've got him on that left-hand side. But Morgan Boy's a deputy, I'm not so sure. Jack Baird, I'm definitely not sure about on that side. And they brought in Dan Finlayson on right back with Lewis Smith in there, with Liam Smith, sorry. I'm really not sure about that right-hand side either. I think Dan Finlayson showed over a couple of seasons at Livingston. He certainly wasn't their outstanding fullback. I think Dunfermline actually have him in Robbie Fraser, someone who I don't want to tout because I wanted to stay at Dunfermline, but he could certainly do a job for a lot of these bottom 6 teams and maybe even be our backup at Rangers' boyhood club. But I certainly didn't think Dan Finlayson was outstanding fullback when you seen that. And then, yes, Jason Holt across there. I think someone like Sam Stanton, his races kind of ran at this level. Not so sure he's going to have an impact. Kai Fotheringham, again, not fancied by Dundee United at this level. Josh Fowler never played at this level. Yeah. And someone like Taylor Stephen, who really, really promising prospect, just cannot seem to get a sniff under Simo Valakari. He played 76 minutes despite being in all 4 squads. Someone who, even from a Scotland point of view, I'm not saying he's going to go and play for the national team, but the type of player you want to see playing regular minutes. And if he's not going to get it there, surely a loan makes sense for him. But that would then leave you a lot of inexperienced players at that level, and just a lack of quality across the board, I think.
Yeah, I think goals is probably the big thing that will make or break St Johnstone. Let's say I don't see them being a terrible team that people take apart willy nilly, but I maybe get a wee bit of the flashbacks to St Mirren's. Like, how many teams will they beat? Is maybe the question to really think about with St Johnstone. And in which case, like, yeah, they might not beat too many, and then they're a good shout for finishing down towards the bottom. But I like the manager, and I like the kind of group think that they've got with it. With the boy Todd, I think there's like three of them that Dunfermline had, so I've just stuck them in the middle because I think I thought it was the midfield base one. I don't know why, so apologies for that. Good catch on you, mate. Thank you very much for that.
He is a centre mid. He plays a lot in centre mid, but he played right wing back last season, so it'd be interesting to see where they use him. And you're saying about Simo Valakari, really, like, he is a good manager, but I think he's got a bit of a syndrome of kind of caught in between. So when you watch St Johnstone last season, they kind of bullied the league by they scored a lot of goals. They were fast flowing and attacking, plenty of crosses into the box. So at that level, it looks very easy. When you step up, and last season, last time they were up, he did want to play football, but he was kind of hamstrung by the players that he had. It feels like he's going to be hamstrung again. So what does he do in terms of style? That's what I'm keen to find out, because I do agree. I think he's a good manager. I think he's passionate about St Johnstone as well. Yeah, I'd be keen to see how he gets on.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, maybe Alvarez can show up and maybe bring a wee bit of that X factor, similar to what you said about Ramos. Maybe put the team on his back a little bit, do a wee bit of the SPFL back in the early millennium. Every team had a guy like this, had a random foreign name that was like the talisman of the squad. Whether you want to go to the extremes of Ravanelli at Dundee and Canadian, whatever, I don't know. But like, it wasn't uncommon back in the day. So maybe having a wee bit of a renaissance in that regard. We didn't mention it with St Mirren earlier, but St Mirren widely expected to complete the signing of Kamaldeen Sulemana's brother. Forget his first
Mm.
name now, but his first name, but he's obviously called Sulemana. And I was thinking, imagine St Mirren having shirts hanging up in this shop, and it's like Ramos and Sulemana, and all this kind of stuff. It's been a while, so yeah. It'll be a long, hard season for St Johnstone. Don't get it wrong, from me in that sense, but yeah, I don't think they're going to be whipping boys. I don't think they're going to be like Livingston and finish cut adrift at the bottom of the league with the totally detached from the rest of the table. That then leaves us, I'm fairly certain, we've only got one team left to talk about, which will be Celtic, the champions at the moment. After a season that, in many ways, I think a lot of Celtic fans would want to forget, but equally, it just will not be forgotten for so many reasons as well, for better or for worse. As we find the team now, like Casper Ho and Camilo Duran have come in, it feels like the Celtic have added a lot more goals into the team. Long overdue goals. Replacements for Kyogo, Daizen Maeda's now left. Ademida Iheanacho. There's been a lot of outgoings up in attack here. But the rest of the team is still a bag of jaggies. It's still like an absolute halfway between half done and half cooked and torn apart and rebuilt in so many ways. I feel a lot better from a Celtic point of view that Casper Ho's in now. I think he adds a lot of goals into the team and will help Celtic, really try to retain the title once more. But I don't look at that team and think it's a good team in terms of the build, the balance, the flexibility. Martin was quoted as saying like he wants to have more than one arrow in his quiver this season. Doesn't want to just be a one-dimensional type manager, which has been one of Celtic's biggest problems over the last couple of years under Ange and under Brendan, is that there's never been an ability to change the game off the bench with two up top, play Jacko and Kyogo. Or there's been lots of this chat over the years that between Brendan and Ange they just never ever done. Feels like O'Neill's kind of half up for that, but again, when I look at this squad, I like a few of the individuals, of course, and Casper, who I'm excited by, but I'm not convinced this team is great, good, or adequate.
I'm certainly not going to disagree with you. There's a few things I think across the board that maybe Celtic they seem to want to just really annoy their supporters at any turn, because there's a few easy deals. We said a little bit earlier about Marcelo Sarachi, someone who I believe is now going to the MLS for 750k. It's quite embarrassing that Celtic can't get a deal like that done when his agent's coming out and saying his wage demands were not high. Celtic were quoted to pay 2 million, but if that's what he's going for, maybe there was a deal to be met in the middle. And that would have gave you adequate backup to Kieran Tierney. Funnily enough, by the way, this is just a random shout, but I'd quite like them to see it, maybe if they have a signing clause for Matthew Anderson, someone who's been really quite good for Kortrijk out in Belgium. Really similar to that Kieran Tierney mould. And again, someone who I watched last season was very impressed by. For someone who came through the Celtic Academy from a youth point of view, from a homegrown point of view, if Celtic could get him back, I think that would actually be a really adequate backup. But of course, that's smart business, so it's unlikely that Celtic will do it. Casper Who apparently is how he was saying his name the other day. I'm assuming that won't be it if it was actually in the Danish way. But there's so much talk about people talking about the Bodo Glimt system. If he had cost a couple of million and he came from a different league and was maybe called Georgios Giacomakis, there would not be the same scrutiny, because the same thing came in. Oh, can he do this? Can he do that? Georgios Giacomakis added goals because he'd scored goals elsewhere, and Celtic made a nice amount of money on him in the end. He was a guy who was at a good age profile. He'd maybe not done it. He didn't have the depth of maybe experience that some other people they might want. He'd maybe only done it over 1 or 2 years for Venlo when he was there. They brought him in and he'd done the job they exactly wanted him to do. Second foil to another striker. Now they've got almost like he might be the first and Camilla Duran be the second, but it's the same idea. You've then got 2 players in there who have quality up the top end, and now because they're on long-term contracts, they're both 24 and 25. So if someone wants to go and take them off you in the next couple of years, they're going to have to pay a really good amount of money, and that puts Celtic in a strong position there. Other parts, obviously, centre mid needs a lot of work. The likelihood is obviously Arne Engels moves on, and I think Arne Engels is a good case study of someone who doesn't have to be absolutely outstanding to go and be to have a good deal. I thought he was outstanding when he came back from injury. I thought him and Alistair Johnson made a huge difference at the end of last season, but not to the point where on a normal season, on a normal functioning club, where you should be rejecting 25 mil in a January bid because any other team would have a replacement already kind of lined up. So I think that kind of is symptomatic of Celtic in the transfer window, and as we've seen so far, it's been one in, one out. So they've only really replaced Dyson Maeda. Obviously, Luis Palma went out, forgetting about him, getting good money. Obviously, it's just weird with some of the centre-backs why you would let Stephen Welsh go for free when he's under contract and other teams want him, and he's just off the back of an extremely strong season. I'll never know. Mike Navrochi has had a good loan spell. He's now went to the team who finished second in France for a loss for Celtic. They've lost about 40% of what they ploughed into him for no apparent reason, because it now leaves them short of cover on the left. You've got Dane Murray in there, who is at an age, he's got such a good profile of a player, but he's so lacking in minutes at the age that he is, where you now look at him and go, is he now someone who can actually deputise? I think the answer is no. He has to go out and get minutes now. And then, of course, across the board, you're looking at, you've lost Maeda, you're going to probably lose Engels. Alistair Johnson now subject to interest from Everton. And I guess the problem Celtic have is they keep going back to sort of what they know, which is players that they've had previously. You're going to run out of players that you've had at some point. So yes, if you get Araujo back at right back, then great. But if you know that Colby Donovan and Ralston are behind him, rather than Araujo being behind Johnson, you feel a lot less prepared than what you would last season.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that that's the problem with doing these shows right before a ball's kicked, because the window's still open for a little while, and I think Celtic are probably, of all the teams we've featured today, the most sensitive to transfer business, making and breaking how the year is going to pan out. I think the Casper Ho move, along with Duran, is like a departure from the norm. They're big deals, players with a proven level, and they've bought them before qualifications have happened. We don't even know who the draw is yet, so very much a departure from the norm in that regard. But like you say with Dane Murray, I was looking at it when Naroki left. Dane Murray has played more times in Europe than he has domestically. And that should be maybe something that's kind of cool or whatever, but for the age that he's at, he has been grossly mismanaged. I know he's had some significant injuries, but he cannot be a backup player if Celtic actually value him, his potential. He has to have a season. Welsh, it's quite quickly forgotten, went to Mechelen in Belgium and had a bit of a successful loan stint. Obviously did very well at Motherwell, that everyone remembers in recent times. But Dane Murray's had nowhere near that level of development exposure, even within the Celtic team, never mind that loan thing abroad. So it does kind of raise the wider question of Celtic's organisation. Like you say, if it's smart business, they won't be doing it. It feels like that's pretty much the way of it, sadly. I think my main concern, we mentioned, but sorry, on you go.
I had one more question for you that I wanted to ask, because I'm curious about this as an outsider. Uh, One of the things from last season, obviously by the end of the season, Martin and they went back to the tried and tested players. So the loan players were essentially bombed out. So January was essentially obsolete, etc., etc. How do you think his style of play is going to differ from last season to this? Bearing in mind, obviously, there's not been a lot of signings so far. So a lot of the personnel is the same. And I think one of the things, at least from an outside point of view, is if Celtic have adequate challenge this year, let's just say from Rangers, does Martin O'Neill's style of play hold up? And might he change it now that he's got, I'm not going to call Casper who a target man, but he's not going to be a press leader like Maeda and put the pressure on from the front. He's probably going to be someone that they seek a little bit more directly. They want to get him in the box and get him scoring goals. How do you think the style of play will change from season to season?
Although Ho isn't or who or whatever, he's not a presser, he still stretches teams. He's still going to hang on the last shoulder and still try and bring those gaps into the middle of the pitch for people to drop in and play with. In terms of the style, I think it's a very interesting question, because I actually believe Martin O'Neill is, for all intents and purposes, with all due respect to him, a figurehead or like a head of the football department. I think for all intents and purposes, he probably is better described as head of football or whatever. I very much see Sean Maloney, Mark Fotheringham as the trainers, as the coaches, as the tactics. And I'm sure O'Neill will have things that he's designing with them and telling them. Because I heard a quote from him the other day talking about, I think we mentioned it earlier, so sorry if I'm repeating myself, but that he wants to have different options and different plans for the team. Maybe play 4-4-2, maybe play 4-2-3-1, so on and so forth. And Celtic haven't had that for a while. But anyway, so I'm not too sure how much of it's actually on Martin to design. I think it's on him to decide. But I think the designs of the team kind of come from the support staff around him and scouting, recruitment, coaching, and whatnot. And I think it'll be interesting in that way as well, because I like Yang. I think he's kicked on quite well. I think Taneki's got some promise. Jota's proven if he can stay fit. And then when you add in Ho and Duran, and then even Negren, imagine Negren in like a good team that's actually scoring goals and actually dominating a bit better and has a bit of a functioning route to goal attack pattern kind of thing. I could see Negren being a bit of a different player. So I think Celtic could quite quickly be quite formidable again. But we've been linked to Will Ferry for backup left back. I know you mentioned Anderson. I've seen that happening. Will Ferry, 5'7". We've been linked to Greg Taylor. Feels like that's going to be the move that's going to happen. 5'7". We're linked to bring in Mika Bauer to be the real Hitachi replacement. 5'7". Going to be keeping Callum McGregor in the engine room. 5 something. We've just signed Oxlade-Chamberlain. He's the same height. We've just gave McEwen a new contract. He's a wee guy as well. I think the thing we all wanted from the Martin O'Neill system, or the Martin O'Neill permanent era, was a bit of physicality into the team, a bit more power into the midfield especially. Feels like the striker brings a bit of that. I think to answer your question on the style holding up and whatever, if we're going to play a midfield, if Celtic are going to play a midfield this season of, let's just call it Bauer, McGregor and Ox, or Bauer, McGregor and McEwen, or Bauer, McGregor and Negren, I think we're going to be pulling our hair out with this long overdue the team needs. And then when you leave Engels out, Engels leaves the building. Was Bauer the replacement for him? Probably not, but there's no other links really going around right now. I don't really see Celtic adding that power into midfield. Lay against that, the Rangers midfield we looked at earlier is very centre midfield heavy, very physical focused, win the ball, duels, second balls, that kind of stuff. So, yeah, I don't know if that really answers your question, but that's the answer I've got for you. I'm sorry. So yeah, I think it's going to be between Celtic and Rangers for the title this year, and it's going to be, it's hard to call right here, right now, and that's not really the point of the show. So I'm not going to, but we'll have a better shot at doing that when the window closes. I think when we'll see a few games as well and what tournaments we've all qualified for. But Celtic, sadly, leaving it too little to too late to this stage of the window, and still a lot to do before the close of the window. Will all that stuff be done in time? It's hard to say. So that's all 12 teams. We've done a wee bit of a preview across them all, what we expect, what we're thinking, what we're feeling, any business that's still to be done. And I've been saying since I started this channel about 6-7 weeks ago, it feels sincerely like this could be the most competitive season we've had from top to bottom, where not only the title race isn't necessarily a foregone conclusion, but every section of the league, the top six, the bottom six, who could finish down actually bottom and be relegated and whatnot. There's so much in a good way. I think some seasons gone by, you really couldn't have forecasted how it might shake out. You were mentioning Hibs finishing third and that kind of thing in recent times. But for good reasons, I think this season is going to be so hard to predict where, like, if we were to try and do the 1 to 12 right now, how many of them would you get right? It could be quite close to none the way it's all going to shake out. So I hope anyone that's tuned into this has really enjoyed it. I think this is going to be a great season for Scottish football fans, no matter what club you're supporting, to really go and get behind. And it all starts this weekend. It'll be really interesting to see what all your thoughts and feelings are on this and how your team shakes out ahead of the season. Hendo, 26-27 SPFL season, how do you see it? How do you feel now that we've went through the preview of the teams we've got?
Certainly going to be hard to top last season. Last season was a bit of an all-timer, but Scottish football has a way of coming up with surprises, making it interesting, and all the rest. So I'm really looking forward to keeping tabs on it. Hopefully we can do something similar come the end of the transfer window to maybe get some predictions in and see what we think. We'll have seen a little bit of everybody by then, so we might be cheating a little bit, but I am sure I'll be back on screens with yourself hopefully soon, talking about all things Scottish football.
Yeah, I look forward to it as well, mate. Thanks again to everyone that tuned in. Don't forget to like and subscribe, get commenting down below, get your receipts left on the internet. Where is your team going to finish? What are your hot takes and everything else you want to get stuck into? We'll be back next week. We'll be breaking down matches and all that kind of stuff. Me and Hendo will do another kind of weekly one, maybe look at the main stories, the main standouts, maybe the main letdowns. We'll see how it all does shake out. But yeah, if you're going to the game, where whoever you support, travel safe, have a good time, and all the rest of it. And Hendo, mate, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks for joining me on this one, this bumper preview.
Been great, mate. Thanks for